Okay, it's 9:15, so we'll pause for a few minutes and let, a little bit to let people join. As you can probably see from the chat, we are planning on recording this session, so if you do not wish to appear on the recording, please turn off your camera and mute your audio. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. I'll begin with introductions. My name's Erica Gardner, and I am with the State Data Center for Washington State. And we are jointly hosting this webinar today with Oregon. And I also just wanted to quickly thank Devin Reed at the Census for her help in planning and hosting this event for us today. And we have an exciting agenda with the Census data for emergency preparedness and response presenters this morning, and then the community resilience estimates demo after that, and then a break for lunch, and then the road to the census or 2030 census for state and local partnerships this afternoon. With that, I guess I'll pass it to Ethan.
Thanks, Erica. Yeah, as those of you who joined us in past years, will recall, we have partnered with Washington State since we started going virtual, and I think it's been a really good partnership. So the initial agenda we sent out had a 9:30 start. So those of you who are here and didn't get the updated final agenda, we just added some introduction time now for our new CLMSO liaison for the region, Brian. But before I mention that, I'll tell you a little bit more about PRC and the history of these events. So as Oregon's State Census Data Center Program liaison, Oregon has organized these annual conferences for data users, census data users, primarily in state agencies, but also for anyone in the state of Oregon who's interested in learning more about how to access and use census data. I think it's been at least probably 25 years that we've been convening these. And on our website, I'll show you briefly how you can access the recordings for the past one and where we will eventually put this one. So you can always get to our website by typing in pdx.edu/PRC. That will take you to our main landing. And from there, you can navigate using the menu to the State Data Center, where you'll find a number of different data extracts. This has been a little bit behind in our updates, so you won't find very much in the 2020 census, but you will find here under SDC events, both a copy of the preliminary agenda for this event, which will be updated with the recordings. But you can also find, we've had a lot of great talks over the years, and I've been very fortunate to have a lot of those recorded. And so you can find the agendas for past meetings as well as recordings for those, in some cases with bookmarks for the specific sections that you may want to join. So encourage folks to look at that. We also found out in our survey that a lot of folks are not aware about the Census Bureau's Census Academy, which is full of recordings and videos that are very interactive and very accessible on how to access and use census data. So, today we have chosen some agenda topics based on a survey of our users last year who were expressed an interest in a number of different things, including race and ethnicity definitions. We now have a date for that. It's going to be November 12th for that, and we will send out details when we have that. But we also are aware of, in the state of Oregon, we're working on a number of different agencies are working on dashboards to capture issues related to environmental justice or social vulnerability, And so the topics today will be a little bit of insight into how Census Bureau has been thinking about these issues and putting together tools to help stakeholders, states, and other visitors, emergency response, to provide them with toolkits to use census data in the context of understanding natural hazards risks and resilience, and also providing census data for areas that have or are experiencing natural disasters. So, very timely given what's going on, still in the Southeast. So, yeah, so I'll turn over the floor to Brian, let you introduce yourself and talk about the role that you play for census data users in the Pacific Northwest.
Terrific. Thank you, Ethan, and thank you, Erica. I'm really pleased to be here with you today. I just want to put this up here if I can. Awesome. Again, my name is Brian. I'm the Data Dissemination Specialist, your local one, here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm based out of the Seattle Metro. I just wanted to share here in a couple minutes that the Data Dissemination Program provides free data trainings on all the wonderful data tools that are available from the Census Bureau. And I'll take a moment here and show you a few. Here are a small list of the more popular workshops that we offer. Again, these are at no cost to you or your agency. These are provided out of your tax money from the Census Bureau. I do want to highlight the top one there, the first two, the ACS and the data.census.gov trainings, with some possible examples that might help with optimizing outreach or research for our educational partners present. Perhaps your agency or institution needs to know what are the most spoken languages in a particular neighborhood, or needs to know the disabilities that are most prevalent in a particular neighborhood. Or maybe you need to know the poverty status by age. Maybe it's young children, maybe it's the elderly. For groups in a particular geography that you may need a table, or maybe you need a map. Both of those we can get right off data.census.gov. Or maybe health insurance status, just as some examples. All of this, and I can't emphasize enough, and much, much more can be obtained easily and quickly from the great tools on data.census.gov. If you want to schedule a training for your organization, here's my contact information. Please don't hesitate to send me an email. We'll get one set up as soon as we can. And if you know of another organization that might need a data training on one of the census tools, or even just the decennial census or the American Community Survey, please pass along my information. I'll be pleased to help. And I will drop my email address, and I'll drop a link for Census Academy. I have to echo what Ethan says. Census Academy is terrific, and I'll put a link for that as well in the chat, so you'll have easy access for that as well. And thank you for this time this morning, and congratulations on such a great program today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. So should we go ahead and get started with our first presenter? Let's go ahead. So our first presenter is Erlene Dowell, and again, she's going to talk about census data for emergency preparedness and response, along with Nadal Hubran. Is that how you pronounce your last name? So Erlene, are you here?
Sorry, Erica. Yes, I'm here. I was trying to get my PowerPoint pulled up. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen. It's your Teams is a little different than our Teams, so I'm glad you can see it. With the thumbs up. Thank you so much, Ethan. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing Nadal and I to be here to talk about a few of Census Bureau's emergency management data tools. Let's start with the U.S. Census Bureau's Emergency Management Hub, or what I like to call the one-stop shop for emergency management. Here's a screenshot of the Emergency Management Hub, which was recently updated. In this screenshot to the left, you are able to see recent events such as Hurricane Milton. Under Milton are recent hurricanes that range from Milton to Ernesto. The website is very interactive and you can click on these hurricanes to learn more. Beneath the hurricanes are all of the emergencies by event type, such as wildfires, air quality, extreme heat, tornadoes, floods, pandemic, and more. To the right of the slide are our emergency management data tools, some of our America Count stories about natural disasters, contributing surveys and programs, and further down the screen, not visible in the slide, are visualizations of the impacts of these disasters. This Bureau is committed to producing data that depicts an accurate portrait of America, including its underserved communities. We supply a variety of data tools that can help the public and policymakers understand the issues surrounding inequities and enable them to propose effective database solutions. The Hub provides quick access to demographic, economic, and resilience information for areas impacted by the latest significant emergency events in the United States and U.S. territories. Users can access by key Census Bureau emergency management related data tools such as My Community Explorer, Census Business Builder, Census Business Builder Report Quick Lookup, and On the Map for Emergency Management, which are a few of the tools we are going to focus on today. These tools work best together because each one can do something different and unique. My Community Explorer, or MCE, is an interactive map-based tool that highlights demographics and socioeconomic data that measures inequality and can help inform database solutions. This tool is designed to help users identify underserved communities. MCE is also allows users to see the relationship of underserved communities to current natural disasters, such as wildfires, hurricanes, air quality, extreme heat, and other severe weather events. Let's go live to the Hub. All right, hopefully you can see the census.gov website. And the easiest way to maneuver over to the Hub is if you hover over topics and then slide over to emergency management disasters and then choose that. Once you choose that, you will see the current events, which is the Hurricane Milton, and then all of the different hurricanes since Ernesto. Again, you can see the event types, the data tools, America Count stories, the surveys and programs, news releases, and visualizations. So we'll go ahead and click on My Community Explorer. And once you get there, there's a pop-up. I would just skip the tour for now. And then as it populates, the map populates, I'll just go ahead and describe a couple things. So currently we are looking at fires, new fires, and then if I just load up a little bit, we can see Christy, which is a hurricane that's, I guess it could be going towards Hawaii or just out to sea. It looks like out to sea since it was 4 and now it's like 1, category 1. Anyway, on the left-hand side, you can see the responsive legend. So anything within the map that is dark brown are those with 3 or more components of social vulnerabilities. Anything in gold are 1 to 2 components. And then anything in blue is 0 components. And then also, if you scroll down, you can see the category legend. And then let's scroll down to see the wildfires. So the bigger the wildfire, the bigger the flame. So you can see the larger icon would be about 300,000 or more acres, while the littlest one is about 0 to 999. And again, I mentioned new fires, so those that have the yellow background with the red flame are new fires that have happened in the last 24 hours. So let's go ahead. Oh, and I do want to mention here on the right-hand side, we have, this is for everything right now, the household population, the households, the population, those with 3 or more components of social vulnerabilities, those below poverty level, those without vehicles, 1 or more disability, and with broadband. So we'll go ahead and zoom into the Northwest. And I'm just going to click on something that's on the border of Oregon and Washington State. And then you can see automatically what we're looking at. So we can see Whiskey Creek incident. It's a wildfire. There are 3,239 acres that have been burned. 24% of it is contained. It was discovered in on July 20th, and this was updated on October 19th. You can use the little chevrons to go past that, and we can see that we have a report for Skamania County in Washington. And then again, it'll give you the components. So we have about 16.93% in this county that are 3+ components of social vulnerabilities, while we have about 50.71% that have 1 to 2, and then we have 32.37% which has 0. If you click on this, you can look at the Census Business Builder report. I'm not going to do that because my colleague Nadal will go through all of that. And then you can look at another county that has been affected. So Multnomah County, I'm so sorry if I'm mutilating these words, but that is in Oregon. And again, it gives you the population, it gives you the 3+ vulnerabilities, the 1 to 2, and the 0. And you can scroll down also to see more data information. And then we have Hood River County. In Oregon, we can see that there's 23,965 that's impacted by this fire, again with the social vulnerabilities, and then more topics. And then finally, you can also look at the ACS reports for Skamania County, and we can see that 8.6% have past 12 months below the poverty level, 83.8% have broadband subscriptions, and then 93.4% have high school graduate or higher. English less than very well is 0.3%, and then we have the 65 and over, and then the Gini index as well. And it goes again for all of the other counties that we looked at too. Okay, so I'm going to close out of that, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on select state, and I'm going to type in, I could type in Oregon, or I can just go ahead and click on Oregon, and it'll zoom into the area. I'll click on county, and I'll look at Hood River County. And then now it zooms into the area so that you can get a closer look. Obviously, this is green, so the estimated components of social vulnerability is 0. But you can also look at the county economic profile. So if I click on that, it gives us the index of income inequality. We have the income below poverty level. We have the household income, which is less than 75,000. We can also look at it by bar charts. And then on the right-hand side, we can see those without health insurance. So the majority of those that are 35 to 64 are without health insurance in this area. We can also look at the social characteristics, such as 1 or more disability in the households, 65 or more living alone, without vehicles, and then those with broadband. And we can see race and ethnicity. So majority are not Hispanic, but we do have a few. And then we have white alone being the majority, and then followed by 2 or more races. And then finally, we can look at the county business profile. So we can see the average annual payroll per employee. We can see what the total employer establishments are. So majority is retail, followed by professional, scientific, and technical services. And then on the right hand is the total non-employer establishment. So we can see, again, professional, scientific, and technical services are the lead industries or establishments. All right, going back to the map. And again, this right-hand column updates to Oregon. And so we can see quickly the household number, the population, the components that are social vulnerabilities, which is 18.59, those that are with disabilities, 1 or more, along with below poverty, without vehicles, and with broadband. You can also go straight to Puerto Rico. This tells you about the data sources. If you need a demo, you can click on that as well. So now I'm just moving on to On the Map for Emergency Management. So On the Map for Emergency Management is a public data tool that provides an intuitive web-based interface for accessing U.S. population and workforce statistics in real time. For areas being affected by natural disasters, the tool allows users to retrieve reports containing detailed workforce, population, and housing characteristics for hurricanes, floods, wildfires, winter storms, and federal disaster declaration areas. Our hurricanes, tropical storms, snowfall, freezing temperature, and floods all come from NOAA. Disaster declaration areas come from FEMA. Our wildfires come from the Department of Interior and Department of Agriculture. And our demographic and economic data comes from the Census Bureau's 2020 decennial, the American Community Survey, and the longitudinal household dynamics origin destination employment statistics, or commonly known as LODES. Just a little bit of background about where the LODES data comes from. Under a voluntary federal-state partnership, states send their unemployment insurance wage records and their quarterly census of employment wage data, and we combine that with our censuses and surveys to create this unique data set. On the Map for Emergency Management has comprehensive reports, real-time data updates, and it's easy to use. It can look at historical events and flexible analyses and visualizations. On the Map for Emergency Management also allows you to look at vulnerabilities. We can look at the social vulnerabilities using the ACS. We have economical data for the LODES data, and we have physical vulnerabilities for our decennial data. Here is a screenshot from Monday of the current events. You can see we have wildfires, snowfalls, FEMA disaster declarations, floods, and hurricanes going on at the same time. We'll go live in a little bit. And this is our DR 4539. Before we go live, I just wanted to share with you this disaster declaration that we will be working with from last year in Washington. So let's go live to look at this example. So the easiest way to get to the On the Map for Emergency Management is really honestly if you Google On the Map, one word, for emergency management, and it should pop up. Or you can type in the lehd.ces.census.gov and it'll bring you to the homepage. And on the left-hand side, you can see all of the different applications we have that covers workforce population. So we will click on the Map for Emergency Management. And now this is live data. All of the current events are on the left-hand side. You can see, again, Christy is here. We have a little bit of Oscar going on over here on the right-hand side. We have some floods in Florida. And then we have tons of disaster declaration areas and then wildfires. So I am just going to go ahead and type in DR 4539, and automatically a box pops up. So you can click on that, and it had given us the population and everything. So we can see through the 2017 to 2021. New data will be updated at the end of the year with 2018 to 2022, along with the loads 2022. So we can see the total households impacted by this disaster was about 4,052,389. We can go through and we can see the disability status by poverty status. And you can click on that. And once you click on that, the map updates and you can see the legend on the right-hand side. We can look at poverty status by in the past 12 months, which is very interesting to see income in the past 12 months below poverty level. And then we can look at some of the physical vulnerabilities, such as year structure was built. So we can see those that were built, in 1939, and while those that were built recently. We can also see the same as the My Community Explorer. We can see vehicles available. And so we see that those without vehicle, there's about 129,000 in the impacted area. And then if there were some outages regarding power, we can see that those that might be impacted would be about 850,038. We can also look at the different things such as the workforce that's employed in the event area. So if I click on that, I can see, how many workers are in those impacted areas. We can look at what the earnings might be lost because of that impact. And then we can look at which industry is most affected. So if I scroll down here and I look at the percentages on the right-hand side, we can see that retail trade is probably the one that's, oh, no, that's a lie, sorry. It'll be healthcare, healthcare and social assistance. You can also look at the geography differently. You can look at it by state, counties, or places. And then the one thing I wanted to show you is if I click on disaster declaration area, it takes me straight to the FEMA page. It tells us exactly what the event was, when it occurred, when it was declared a disaster, some of the news releases, and then you can do this designated area. And then you see that you can import this shapefile. So I'll just click on import. And then now I'll just go back to the on the map for emergency management and actually back to my PowerPoint. So once I do that, I wanted to talk about On the Map. So On the Map was actually motivated by 9/11. We knew where everyone was during the evening hours, but we didn't know where everyone was during the daytime hours. So On the Map kind of connects where the worker works and where the worker lives. And you can't talk about the On the Map for emergency management without talking about On the Map. So On the Map is a robust data tool that allows users to analyze workforce characteristics all the way down to a census block. The tool allows analysts to look at workforce composition by industry and demographic characteristics, along with worker inflow and outflow and commuting patterns. In this slide, I imported the shape files from FEMA to do an area comparison where we are able to compare the workers by county, with King County being the highest county that impacted the most jobs of workers. So let's go live to look at this analysis. So I will go back to the LEHD homepage. I'm going to click on the map on the left-hand side. And you can actually type in any geography that you would like, but I'm just going to import the shapefile. I'm going to choose, well, it's not a shapefile, sorry. I'm going to cancel that. Sorry, we're going to import the KML. And we're going to choose that. And we're going to click on that. And then we'll import it. So once I do that, it comes into on the map, and we can zoom to the imported shapefiles. You can select all of them or none of them. It's up to you. But I'll go ahead and continue with, I'm going to select all polygons, and then I'm going to continue with selected features. And then here you can do a whole bunch of things to do custom. Wanted to, you can draw a polygon, you can take out certain things, but we'll just go ahead and click on confirm selection. And once I do that, I just want to mention all of our data tools are very intuitive. So if you're working your way through the data tools, it automatically kind of walks you through each data tool. So for example, once I do that, this pop-up box comes up. It tells me how many square miles is in the selected area, and it tells me how many census blocks are in the selected area. And of course, I'm going to click on this perform analysis on selection area. And then it gives me an analysis setting. So every single column has a little question mark that you can hover over. The first column, you can pick whether you want to look at where the worker works or where the worker lives. You can decide on 5 different analyses. So the area profile gives you an overview of the area comparison. You can compare earnings, you can compare education, industries, any type of characteristics you want to look at. Distance direction tells you which area they're coming into and what region they're coming from and how many miles they're traveling. Destination tells you where they're coming from. And then inflow, outflow tells you how many people travel into the area to work, how many people live and work in the area, and how many people travel out of the area to work. Then we have the years. You can select 2021 all the way to 2005 if you want to look at the longitudinal data. And then here on the job type, all jobs is if you have more than one job. Primary job is if, not if, is the job that brings home the most income. And then the all private and private primary are the same, but they're just private jobs. So I'm going to click on primary jobs because that does include federal jobs as well. And then I'm going to go over here and click on area comparison. I'm going to change it from places to counties. And then I'm going to click on this bold go with the exclamation point and lightning bolt. And then that gives me a map with the data as well as a table on the right-hand side. So the table tells you that the area that has the most workers in it is King County, like we talked about in the PowerPoint. You can also click on the area now. This is a new update, and it tells you exactly all workers in, why do I pick these words, Snohomish County, and it tells you how many workers are in that area. Or you can click on over here and decide to look at that. And again, oh, this one's a good one, Mason County with 12,076. And you can look at the different characteristics. So maybe you want to look at earnings, you want to look at industry and so on. You can go and do that yourself too. So I'll just click on this real quick and we'll look at agriculture. I think that would be interesting for wildfires. And you can compare how many areas have agriculture in those counties and how, what the percentage is and so forth. All right. So with that, here are some resources for each of the data tools that I talked about, as well as the Census Business Builder, which Nadal is going to be talking about as well. And I hand it off to Nadal.
All right, thank you, Arlene. My name is Nadal Gibran. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the data tools that I'm excited about, Census Business Builder. Let me start by sharing my screen. Okay, a little bit about myself. My name is Nadal Gibran. I work with the Economic Management Division, and I'm currently the technical lead for the Census Business Builder data tool. And I've been involved with Census Business Builder in some fashion since around the time it was first developed. and I took more of a lead position within the last year or so. This is my contact information, so if there's anything that any questions you have after our discussion today, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you. Excuse me. So this basically describes the guiding principles that went into creating the Census Business Builder. The first, it's easy to use. Because we use plain language, tooltips, and other sort of easy to use features, we kind of ensure that we provide an overall easy user experience. From the beginning, we've had a customer focus. We've received a lot of feedback over the years, and today, again, if you see something, or if you don't see something that you would like, or if you have any feedback at all, please let me know. The feedback that we've received is really what's driven the enhancements for this tool over the years. We provide access to census data and more. When we first launched the tool in 2015, we only had Census Bureau data. Soon after that, we realized that there was a great benefit into combining data from other government agencies, such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics and U.S. Department of Agriculture. We are using the latest technology. So another fact is Census Business Builder was actually the first tool to make it into the cloud at Census. At the bottom of the page on the right, you'll see a link for Census Business Builder, but I'm also going to show you how to get to the tool directly during the demonstration. We designed the Census Business Builder to allow for a positive and enriching user experience. It's useful because it can help generate customizable reports that can serve as business plans. It can assist with grant applications, and it's also a useful tool for economic development planning as well as emergency preparedness, as we'll see today. It's easy to locate. You can get to the application directly from census.gov, or you can just do a simple search using your preferred search engine. The application is accessible across all mobile devices, including Android and iOS. We've also made sure that it is 508 compliant. Recently, we went through a full 508 compliance review, and we've enhanced the application accordingly. It's credible because you are looking at the latest and most accurate data because it comes directly from Census. It's easy to use. The application is packed with features, and it's also mission critical and valuable. This is the tour of Census Business Builder. Again, we're going to kind of look through this in real time during our demonstration, but this basically walks you through all of the functions that you see on your screen at any given time when you're logged on to Census Business Builder. Because of the number of features we have, we've sort of packed in as much as we could into the tool while still making it easy to read and intuitive and user-friendly. So we've designed it so that there's a tooltip available for every feature, every button, everything on your screen that you think you can interact with. There's most likely a tooltip for that. You can also skip forward to a different feature instead of just going through the cards in order. You can go backwards, and you can also exit the tooltip and get right into the application. These are the key features of Census Business Builder, and this is usually what you'll see when you first get into the system. Starting at the bottom is our dashboard. This is where you can, at a glance, you can see all of the key data for a selected geographic area. So in this case, we're looking at establishment data, as well as other data items you'll see on the right-hand side of the dashboard under stats. There's also some more data items at the very left of the dashboard, and I'm gonna walk you through these different sections as well. But basically, what we're looking at is the metro area for Portland, Vancouver, Hillsborough, Oregon, Washington. And once we've selected that, we will see all of the relevant information automatically display in the dashboard. The information in the dashboard itself is also customizable. You can swap out different data items and really customize and tailor the dashboard to your specific use case. Above that is our geographic level selection. You can manually zoom in and out of the map until you find your geography and click on it that way. You can also type in your geographic area into that search bar, and within the first 3 or so characters, you'll begin seeing results. And you can select one of those results, and selecting the result will again populate that dashboard. And then finally, you can select the geographic levels below the text box. We've got state, metro, county, city, town, zip code, and tract level. So selecting any of these geographic levels will redraw the base map, those boundaries on the map, and you'll see those new geographic labels for the levels that you're looking at. Excuse me. Above that, we've got what we call the custom industries section. This is where you can add at least one or more industries to your map here, so you can really target your information and your data towards a specific sector or industry or groups of industries. And when you use this in combination with the geographic area search and the region builder, you can really create some really powerful data products and reports. The tool has bivariate mapping, which means you can display up to 2 variables at the same time on the map. And we have what's called a primary and a secondary map variable. And you can swap out your primary and secondary map variable by clicking on the middle part of the top ribbon where it says establishments. So we're looking at the primary map variable, which is establishments, number of establishments. Below that, it says no secondary variable. So we do have the option of assigning a secondary map variable to the map. And if you look at the dashboard, we see the same information. We see on the left of the dashboard those 2 cards for primary and secondary map variable. The first one is establishments, and the second one is still open, so variable not selected. So it all sort of matches up there. Moving on over, we have filters. You can use this to visually adjust the map and filter out certain ranges within a particular variable that you do not want to see. And you can apply up to 3 filters at once. Okay, and then we've got our map buttons. Our map buttons, we have a new button there, the home button. So because you can really go crazy, kind of adjusting your map and adding and removing different geographies and industries, we've added this home button to reset all of your selections and start fresh with a new map. We've also got reference layers. We've got a zoom in and out button. We can change our base maps. Below that to the right is our legend. Our legend describes the variables that we're looking at. As I said earlier, we have bivariate mapping, which means we'll see 2 variables listed on this legend. The first variable is mapped or is assigned to the primary map variable. So looking at the dashboard as well as the establishments at the top middle of the map, we can see that in 3 places we can see our primary map variable assigned. There's no secondary map variable, but if we assigned a secondary map variable, we would also see that expressed in the legend. And then finally, our reports. These are one of the most powerful features of Census Business Builder. These are customizable reports. Each section is interactive with charts and graphs that you can change for each variable within a table. You can customize the report by hiding or showing certain sections. For instance, if you have a certain geographic level selected and there may not be some business data available at that level, then you can hide all of those business sections from the report, and then you save those your selections. You'll have a clean report to look at. And once you've made your selections, you can also share your report by simply copying and sharing the URL. All of your changes to the report are also saved into the URL. You can create reports for single or multiple industries as well as single or multiple geographies. This next slide talks about one of the an important feature and one that we're going to really focus on today with Census Business Builder, called a region builder. Census Business Builder allows you to build a region, a custom region. So not only are you limited to just a singular geography that you can click on, you can add multiple groups of geographies together to create your own custom region. And there's 3 options for doing so. The first option is you can build a region of 2 or more geographies of the same type. So just staying with all counties or all metros and that sort of thing. The next option is you can build a region of 2 or more geographies of 2 or more types. So you can mix in county and a metro and a city town. And option 3, and this is one that we're going to explore, is you can build a region using a pre-built region. As I said earlier, we went through a compliance review program, and as a result of that, we optimized Census Business Builder to be accessible across all devices. So it's mobile optimized. You can view Census Business Builder and interact with all of its features, regardless of what device you're using. You can use a mobile of any kind, iOS or Android, as well as your tablets and that kind of thing. We've also implemented some other, some other enhancements for become Section 508 compliant. What you're looking at on this slide is an example of our high contrast mode. This allows users to really view the text, because the high contrast sort of puts a contrast between the text and the background. So it really makes things more readable, as you can see. And another one that we implemented was those tooltips that I talked about. So all throughout the application, if you hover over anything, you'll see an individual hover over or tooltip for that section of what you're looking at. All right, so that concludes the PowerPoint portion of this demo. I'm going to switch over to a live demo of the system, really show you what we can do. Okay, so this is the census.gov website, and here's how you can get to the application. You want to hover over the section Data and Maps. Look for either Data Equity Tools or Data Tools and Apps. You can find Census Business Builder within each of these subpages here. As you can see, the link is right there for Census Business Builder at the top of this row. This is the Census website for Census Business Builder, and I would recommend bookmarking this because we do make updates to this with relevant information. For instance, anything that comes up, any issues that we've identified that need to be fixed, we will include them here under known issues in the comments. This tells you what version of Census Business Builder we are currently using. So we are now in 5.7, which we released about a month ago. Some general features about the tool, as well as more version specific features, things that we've added, enhanced, and fixed lately in the tool. Below that, these are some useful flyers covering all types of topics within Census Business Builder. You can also find more flyers there in the overview section. So again, very, very useful information. I would recommend bookmarking this. Okay, so once you're here, you can get right into the application by selecting Census Business Builder. Right, and this is the map. Again, we can start right with our location search, or we can take a tour. And so we've already discussed the tour during the PowerPoint. Let's just kind of walk through what we're looking at here on the map. So we can either search for a location to start with, or I can click out of this and just play around with the map. These are the map buttons that we saw on the slide, zoom in and zoom out. Also, use your mouse wheel if you'd like to do that. Right now, we're looking at state level boundaries. I can adjust this to maybe metro level. Zooming in a little further. As you can see here, I've got my primary map variable listed as establishments, and it's also reflected here in the dashboard. I'm going to select just any metro area just to get data here. So when you click on Portland, Vancouver, now we've got establishment data for this geographic area, which is Portland, Vancouver, Hillsborough, Oregon, Washington. And then right away, I'm presented with some useful charts and graphs for this geographic area, right? And I can also customize this dashboard further, as I said. So what are we looking at? We've got room here for 4 data items, and we've got 2 more spots there as well. So by default, we've programmed the dashboard with these data items: median household income, percent high school degree or higher, all employer establishments total, and home ownership rate. And either swap these out with another one by clicking on the box and then selecting change variable, which brings you up to this repository of all the data available in Census Business Builder. And you can also click on the star, which converts this into a map variable. And again, map variables are useful because they're visually reflected in the map as well as the legend. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's convert this data item from a dashboard variable to a map variable by selecting the star. And now it's moved over here. Median household income is now my primary map variable, and we can confirm that by looking at the dashboard, at the legend, and even up here as well. I can also set a secondary map variable. Let me click on that, make sure secondary variable is set there, and let me put maybe another socioeconomic characteristic, percent bachelor degree. Okay, so pretty self-explanatory, but this tells us, tells us the percent of folks with bachelor degrees or higher, as well as our median household income. And this is only for metros, so fairly large geographic area. But I could, if I would like to, a little bit. This tends to slow things down, so I'm reluctant to do this, but I think we should be okay. I just click on county. We'll see the map. Those county lines are drawn now. And now I'm looking at Clark County, Washington. And I can also really just evaluate any geographic area that I'm looking at right here in terms of the primary and secondary map variable. I can do that by hovering over, and it looks like it's still refreshing. That's why I was a little hesitant to do that. But let me see if this doesn't help out. If I just go back to that. Okay, good. So the primary and secondary map variable are also expressed here in that tooltip that you're looking at as I hover over this metro area. Now look what happens as I hover over another metro area. The information will change automatically without me forcing me to click on anything. So we really make it sort of easy to visualize our data in different ways. Now looking at the legend, we can see that there is a sort of correspondence between the color here and the map variable. So the darker the color means the larger the number of that map variable. So the darker blues mean a higher median income. And then the second map variable is expressed here as a proportional circle. So the larger the circle, the larger the number of this one. So the larger the percent for bachelor degree or higher. So it looks like the CTAC area seems to have a darker blue and a fairly large circle. So we can assume just by that we're looking at high levels of income and bachelor degrees. And we can get, we can switch the county level once we've identified this metro area and see within the metro on the county level, how these compare with one another. Do that. Okay. So that was a very, quick, brief summary of the dashboard and the variables. I think those are important points to understand, because it really lets you get the most out of the map is when you know how to use these variables properly. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears now and talk about how Census Business Builder can be used in emergency management. Okay, so let's go back to our dashboard, and Up till now, we've been looking at the detailed view, but I can switch over to this other tab, region view, and this allows me to build my own region. So we will start by clicking on create region. And I can create a region by selecting individually regions here. As I do that, they're added to my region. I can give it a name. My regions. Another one. I can save my region, and now I see all those counties. Really, they can be any geography, but in this case, these are counties. I can see them all listed here on the left. I can see them all listed here, and they are ranked against each other in terms of whatever I have set for my primary map variable, which is median household income. You can also compare one county to another. Give that a minute to load. And those are based on these items there. So establishments, education, home ownership rate. Okay. Now for emergency management, what we can do is we don't have to draw our own region. We can use our pre-built regions and pull in data from FEMA. When they issue a disaster declaration, we pull that data into the tool and we allow you to build a report for those disaster areas. Okay, so this is what it looks like. We can specify a date range. By default, it's set to the current month, and these are the disasters that have occurred during that month. There's one that I wanted to focus on, which occurred at the beginning of the year. So let's go back to around this time. Get the actual number there. I had the report 4775. Okay. Just 47. So I can type it in here if I don't want to look through the list here, but this is the one I wanted to discuss. This is the Washington severe winter storms, straight line winds, flooding, landslides, and mudslides. So let's select this one right here. You can do this for any disaster that we have that we pull in. But I think this is a very good example. So when you select your disaster region, the region is pre-selected here, so it pulls in all those counties. This is all at the county level. You can save your edits. You can also adjust the name of your region, but I'm just going to save my edits, and then we have those same features, functionality available. We can rank different counties within this area to each other in different ways. You can also select top imports, and you can see for this disaster area the top imports. This pulls data from our international trade program, so we can see the imports that may have been threatened by this disaster. You can see the highest import by quite a bit is mineral fuels, mineral oils, and products of their. This is the full description, and we can unlock more data by selecting report. And this is the Census Business Builder business profile. And I'm going to walk through this fairly quickly. I'm just going to focus on the emergency management functions or features here. As you can see, we've got pretty much all the data that's available in Census Business Builder. And it's customizable, it's interactive. But what I would like to focus on is this section, which is supply chain. So we've got our region, which is the FEMA disaster declaration 4775. This is the description of that declaration. These are the counties that make up that region here. And again, these were selected in the map. These are hyperlinked, so you can click on any one of these counties that make up this region and generate your own report just for that area as well. Okay. And as you can see, I've got quite a few of these tabs open, and we've made it easy to keep track of what you're looking at because we've got your header, which stays at the top. It's fixed. It tells you your current geographic area as well as your industry. So let's scroll down to supply chain. And again, this is the imports, top 10 imports for this selected area. So these imports might be threatened if there is a disaster probably were threatened by this disaster because it did happen. Next is the top impacted industries. This is a percent of national employment by industry. So on a national level, these industries make up the highest percent of that industry's employment for this area. So nationally, 4.52% of the information sector employment may be impacted because that's how many are working in this disaster area. Below that, we've got the impacted products for information. And we have information because this is the top impacted industry. So this further trickles down into the next section, which is the products that are produced and sold for this industry. And these are those products. And this is the values of those products. So again, a disaster may cause significant disruption to these imports, to employment for these sectors nationally, and for the production and sales of these products. Okay. I think I'm just about the end of my time, but I will conclude with our slide there. It's been a great pleasure to present to you all today. This is my information as well as my colleague Arlene. So feel free to jot this down and reach out to us if you have any questions about anything we talked about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to both of our presenters. Those were really great presentations, and showed how data that you might not realize is out there for the purposes of understanding impacts, like economic impacts from natural disasters, closures of roads, and we've had record wildfire seasons in Oregon. I know Washington's been somewhat insulated from this, but we are kind of catching up with California rapidly in terms of the amount, the share of and the intensity of wildfires here in Oregon. So really appreciate that both presenters, and for some of you who may have been wondering about the SV, the social vulnerability on the CRE, we do have another presentation today, which we will get to learn more about those. But do we have time for some Q&A? I don't have the agenda in front of me.
I think right now we're right on the CRE demo. So
Okay.
So with that, again, thank you so much, our prior presenters, Arlene and Nadal, and we'll move to our next presenter, is Benjamin, is it Gurentis?
Gurentz.
Gurentz. Are you ready to present?
I sure am. Yeah, let me share.
Well, great.
Yeah, let me share my screen. All right. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Benjamin Gurentz. I am the branch chief of Small Area Modeling and Development branch. My branch is in charge of creating and producing the community resilience estimates, which I'll describe in depth in this presentation. It's actually much more of a program of estimates than just one type of product. We have actually multiple different types of products at this point. And I'll specifically focus on the community resilience estimates, the equity supplement, which is particularly helpful in the event of a disaster. And I can demo our equity profiles tool, which is very user-friendly and can be very helpful when you are wanting to know not just the CRE estimates, but some of the community context for why an area might be considered vulnerable or not, based on some other characteristics. All right, so let me start my presentation. Okay. So the Census Bureau's Community Resilience Estimates, also known as CRE, provide a precise, understandable, and easy-to-use measure of social vulnerability to disasters and shocks. It's actually a fairly new estimate, so if you've never heard of CRE before, that is totally fine. It is still fairly new because it came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, it reiterated the need for usable information about the population. And many groups reached out to the Census Bureau for data to look at vulnerable populations during COVID. And there was an overwhelming need for a single, easy-to-understand metric of social vulnerability. Now, some people that might be familiar with social vulnerability indices might say, well, there's other social vulnerability indices that already exist. So why did the Census Bureau need to create their own social vulnerability estimate? And there's many reasons why. The first is that we have access to microdata, meaning that the microdata for the ACS has individual and household level data, and that helps retain the correlation of individual risks. So compared to, let's say, social vulnerability index and some other ones, it tends to be much more characteristics of populations at higher levels of geography, like percent 65 or older, or percent with a disability. And then this all kind of gets averaged together to create an estimate. But what we have is microdata. So instead of just looking at vulnerable characteristics, we can actually measure vulnerable populations. We can see whether the household has multiple components of social vulnerability. So that helps retain those correlations between those types of risks. And it's really ideal for identifying vulnerable populations, because we don't always know if the group that might be vulnerable in terms of being, 65 and older, are they also the one that tends to be in poverty or have a disability or have some other characteristics? We're actually able to look at those households because of the access to microdata. And this is just kind of showing that graph of the different geographic levels. What we do is we flag those households, and then we aggregate up to produce estimates at higher levels of geography. So you can see, the number of vulnerable populations in the tract or county or state. So we're able to kind of use a little bit more granular data in that sense. And then another reason why the Census Bureau got involved is we have statistical experts in small area modeling that can improve survey data with modeling techniques and auxiliary data. So the Census Bureau, we also have what's called SAPI, the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates. And that's actually able to get, at the school district levels, county level, 1-year estimates of poverty across all counties. And if you're familiar with ACS data, you can't get poverty estimates for all counties for a single year. You'd have to use 5-year data. So it's a little bit more timely. And the reason why you can get more timely data is because SAPI and CRE use small area estimation methods, where it has a direct estimate coming from that main survey, but then we pull in additional data sources and try to create a modeled estimate. And then we basically create a composite estimate between the direct survey estimate and the model estimate that weights based on sample size. So when you have greater sample size, it's going to be weighted more towards the survey estimate. When its sample size is small, and these tend to be less reliable areas, it's weighted towards the modeled estimate. And the modeled estimate uses other data sources. So we're basically able to have much more sophisticated models. And that's something that's different than other social vulnerability indices. Then finally, this altogether creates a very granular, precise, accurate, and timely data product measuring social vulnerability down to the tract level. And again, going back to the small area estimation methods, they're actually more efficient and they produce smaller margins of error. So we feel more confident in the precision of those estimates. And they are also 1-year estimates, not 5-year estimates, like a lot of other indices. And I wanted to put this out there that there was recently a publication on the CRE looking at excess COVID deaths and comparing the CRE to other measures like single demographic characteristics like race or age, or SVI, or the Social Vulnerability Index of SVI, or FEMA's National Risk Index. And CRE was actually the greatest, most stable prediction of COVID-19 excess deaths. So that's published in Demography if you want to look that up, and that came out recently in June. So there's validation that not only is it reliable, but there's validation that CRE is actually a very good predictor of something like COVID-19, for example. So when we talk about social vulnerability in the population, we're really talking about groups that tend to be slower to recover after the event of a disaster. So resilience is about bouncing back, and being vulnerable means it takes longer to bounce back, after a disaster would hit. And the way that we measure social vulnerability is by 10 indicators. that's directly from the American Community Survey. We look at things like poverty, caregiver status, crowding, communication barrier in terms of English proficiency, age, 65 or older, employment, disability, health insurance, vehicle access, and internet access. So among these, what we call components of social vulnerability, we see, how many characteristics of that household are getting flagged. When it's 3 or more, we consider that very vulnerable. 0, not vulnerable, and then 1 to 2 is a little bit more moderate. So the direct estimate comes from the ACS, and then our modeled estimate that we use as part of our small area estimation methods, we use the population estimates program data. So again, this is kind of an example of how that would work. Let's say you have a 2022 ACS household, and we find that they are in poverty, they don't have broadband internet, and they don't have a vehicle. They would be coded as 3 plus components of vulnerability. And then this gets aggregated to higher levels of geography, essentially. Oops. And then this is what I was referring to in terms of small area estimation methods. In the event of an ACS estimate, if you have large sample sizes, the weight is going to go more towards that direct survey estimate because we have greater confidence in the estimate. It has higher relative precision compared to any kind of modeled estimate. But in the event of small sample sizes, and these are what we're tend to be more concerned with because there's reliability when you look at smaller levels of geography, this is where you get more weight towards the indirect estimate. And that's going to have higher relative precision. And then basically, they kind of become a composite estimate that gets weighted based on sample size. So in terms of outputting estimates, the CRE outputs the number of people that are in a social vulnerability category, the percentage of the population that's in that category, and the margin of error. So in terms of the categories, when there's 0 flagged indicators, that's considered low social vulnerability. 1 to 2 flagged indicators is considered moderate, and 3 or more flagged indicators is considered high. And this is based on natural cuts in the distribution. This is just kind of how the categories empirically shake out there. And this is different than other measures of social vulnerability, where it's more of an index value of 0 to 1, 1 being the most vulnerable, 0 being the least vulnerable. But a lot of those estimates are also something that's used relative to other geographies. So it's trickier to compare the change over time with other measures of social vulnerability because it's always relative to other geographies that year. But with the CRE, you can actually look at, whether the population with 3 or more components is changing from year to year without even comparing to other geographies. You can still compare to other geographies, but that also allows you to compare geographies to themselves over time. So that's another added benefit of CRE. And then these are the distributions of the 2022 CRE estimates. We find that 35% of the population have 0 components. 44% have 1 or 2 components, so that's the most common category. Then 20.6, around 21% have 3 or more components of social vulnerability. And then you also see a margin of error below that percentage. Again, that's another benefit of CRE, is that we actually have margins of error, so you can actually take into account that statistical uncertainty. Because remember, we're working with survey data, model data. There is uncertainty, and we want to still be able to capture that. So what CRE data products should I use? This is going to come down to what type of research question you have and what you're looking at, because we have multiple different CRE products. We have our standard CRE, which is what I just covered. We also have CRE for equity. That is the CRE, but it has additional variables from the ACS, decennial, and the planning database to give you a little bit more community context and comparisons, and has just a little bit more information with other variables so you can have a better understanding of why an area might be vulnerable in the first place. We have CRE for Puerto Rico, and of course, that is a product geared more towards Puerto Rico, so there's slight adjustments to how we measure vulnerability there and how we model it. But it's the similar idea of measuring vulnerable populations in Puerto Rico. And then finally, we have CRE for heat. It's basically a CRE model that is customized and geared specifically for excessive heat, right? So given what is happening in the country and with climate and looking at heat waves and things like that, there was a desire from other researchers and institutions to be able to specifically look at extreme heat events. And that's a product where it takes into account things like whether you're living in a mobile home, whether you have air conditioning, things like that. So the social vulnerability is specifically geared towards extreme heat. So as I mentioned, standard CRE, that's a very easy, broad, understood metric of social vulnerability. We have it at the nation, state, county, and census tract level. Good for general estimates for impacts of disasters, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, wildfires, pandemics. Recently with the hurricanes, we've worked with FEMA to identify vulnerable areas using just the general CRE estimates. So it tends to be very helpful as kind of like a broad measure of social vulnerability. The 2022 data was released on January 2024, and the 2023 data will be available in January 2025. So that's going to be our recurring release date going forward is January for our standard estimates. So this is our standard CRE tool. We call it just a CRE dashboard. This is best when all you really want to look at are those CRE estimates, where are the most vulnerable areas, the percent of the population that has 3 or more components, 1 or 2 or 0. It's a little bit more straightforward. I will say we are actually changing our standard tool this year, and we'll have a different type of tool than what you're seeing here. But similarly, this is kind of more of your very basic tool that's focused a little bit more on just directly understanding the CRE estimates for a given geography. But we also have what I mentioned, the equity supplement. We call it CRE for equity. This is basically a data set of estimates from multiple programs. So not only the CRE estimates, but it has some ACS 5-year data, some 2020 decennial census data and planning database data. So all these variables get merged into this big data set. And this kind of helps you understand the social context for the CRE estimates. So for example, hey, this area is flagged as having, a high percentage of 3 or more components of social vulnerability. Why is that? That's the common question. People just want to know why. The equity supplement is very helpful for explaining the why, because you can look at those characteristics and you can see, even though ACS 5-year, that's not really used in terms of how we model it, it can still give you information of the characteristics of the community. For example, does it have a high age 65 or more population? Does it have high poverty rates? Broadband internet. The CRE for equity has all this information there, which will give you a better idea of maybe why an area has a high CRE estimate. This helps with discussions about equity. We have statistical flags where you can compare the geography to the national rate to see whether it's higher or lower, given the margins of errors. So it allows for better comparisons and better explanations for the CRE. So in general, it's a very useful data set to use, especially if you're exploring a lot of different aspects of CRE and vulnerable populations. There's just a lot of data to work with there. So it's fairly popular. This is our standard CRE for equity dashboard. Similar to the standard CRE dashboard, we're kind of drifting away towards this and moving towards what I'm going to demo next, which is our equity profiles tool. But this is live right now. It does give not just the CRE estimates, but if you look around outside of the map, it has statistics on the area that's below poverty, without a vehicle access, disability, broadband internet, all those information is part of the dashboard. But we wanted to create something that maybe was a little bit more accessible and easy to read and follow. So recently we created the CRE for equity profiles. And we consider this a pretty accessible equity tool that allows you to look at whether an area is considered vulnerable or not, based on 3 or more components of social vulnerability, and then look at those characteristics from the ACS and decennial and seeing whether you can understand why an area might have a high CRE estimate. So I am not going to click the first link up here because our Tableau visualization URL was actually down this morning and I had to send an email. So I needed to get a backup link instead. So I wasn't scrambling. So I'm going to click the backup link and demo that instead. Let me move that over real quick. So this is the CRE Equity Profiles tool. So you'll see at the top, you can search the geography that you're specifically interested in. The default is the United States. Up here, you see the vulnerable population. This is 3 or more components of social vulnerability. But if you want to look at the distribution of 0 components or 1 to 2, you also have that information if you hover over that icon. You also get the estimate of total population here, housing units, and then the population in rural areas. And then you'll see around the map, and the map shows more vulnerable areas are tend to be darker. So here it tends to be more southern states, southeast states. But I'll show that there's actually quite a bit of variation once you go below the state level. So around here, you also see indicators based on social characteristics. So education, disability, whether there's the number of caregivers in the household. But you can change the topic if you're specifically interested in economic characteristics, poverty rates, health insurance coverage, employment, general income inequality. And then finally, you can change the topic to housing or household. And I do see a quick question in the chat, which I'll mention quickly. Yes, you can download the CRE either directly from the CRE website. If you just Google Community Resilience Estimates Census, we have CSV files you can download, or you could use data.census.gov and just search CRE. And you can download it for specific geographies using data.census.gov as well. So there's multiple ways to download the data. Thank you. But yes, so going back to the tool, you could change the topic to housing, household, and look at things like vehicle access, broadband internet, crowding, English proficiency. These are all things that are tied with social vulnerability and how we measure vulnerability in the CRE. So it can give you a good idea of what is going on in a certain area. So this is what it is for the United States, but let's say we want to look at a specific state. Let's go to Washington. All right, so you look at Washington, and actually for the state, the vulnerable population is 17.5%, which is actually lower than the national estimate. It tends to be a higher high school graduation rate. And there's some other characteristics as well for why the 3 or more component estimate is not very high. But, again, we have estimates down to the census tract level, so it's always good to dig a little further. Even if you look at this map that looks at counties, you see some variation there. Let's say we wanted to look at King County. Click on that, and again, King County also has a low vulnerable population at 15.8% with a high school graduation rate and a low disability rate. But again, when you look a little further into the map, you zoom in, you start to see a lot more variation. So while there are some blue areas that tend to have low rates of 3 or more vulnerabilities, you can look at this area, this census tract right here, and see, oh, this census tract has 40.4% that have 3 or more components. So roughly 4 in 10. So that is actually higher than the national estimate. And if you look at, well, why is it higher than the national estimate? What makes this tract a little bit different? First thing you notice is there's a high rate of those with a disability, 29.6%, for example. but you can also look at other characteristics as well. And you see, oh, 23.2% are below the poverty level. And then the employment is also low. So right there, you have a lot of information that's letting you know that this is going to be a vulnerable track relative to the national rate. So there's also a high level of people that don't have vehicle access. So again, in the event of a disaster, vehicle access is very useful. So that is a vulnerability. So again, one of the benefits of what we have with the CRE is we can go down to the census tract level. It's a 1-year estimate. It's reliable. It's valid in terms of predicting excess COVID deaths and other types of disasters. So there's a lot of benefits to the data itself, and then with using a tool like this. And if you scroll down, you can actually get more information. You have this chart right here on race and ethnicity, poverty levels, high school graduation rate, income, health insurance. So all this information is right there in the tool if you want to know more about that area. So this is a pretty popular tool that we're going to be emphasizing more with CRE for Equity. And so I wanted to demo that for people that are interested. But again, the type of CRE product is mostly going to be tied to what you're interested in. So CRE for heat is experimental, but it is geared towards extreme heat event. And when I say experimental, it's basically published on the experimental data products page at Census, because it does have some methods of looking at having air conditioning. And we pull in data from other sources like the American Housing Survey using machine learning. But some of the methods are a bit more experimental, so we did release it as an experimental estimate. But the cool thing about that product is that it also comes with heat exposure data. So not only are you looking at social vulnerability, but you can actually see whether the area itself has high heat exposure. So with that together, it's very helpful. CRE for Puerto Rico, as I mentioned, measures social vulnerability in Puerto Rico. It goes down to the tract level again. There are some slight methodological differences. For example, English proficiency isn't considered a component of social vulnerability in the context of Puerto Rico. So instead we don't focus on that as much as we focus on education. We have an interactive tool that has those CRE estimates, but also has NRI hazard risk data. And so you get a little bit of, again, the social vulnerability, but you also see a little bit more of hazard and hazard risk as well. And then CRE for Puerto Rico also has an equity supplement similar to the US that has additional variables if you want to understand why an area is considered vulnerable. And we have an equity profiles tool there as well. All right, so thank you very much. This is the CRE homepage, and I mentioned before, this is where you can directly download the data. You can also download it at using data.census.gov, at least with the standard estimates. But if you want to use CRE for Equity, you do have to go directly to the CRE for Equity page. Same thing with CRE for heat. So the standard estimates are in the data.census.gov or the API. But some of the other CRE products, you're going to have to go directly to the page. So if it's okay, I can answer some of the questions right now. Would that be okay?
Yes. We have plenty of time.
Great. All right. So I think the first the question about, yes, it's available through the API as well as downloading directly from the website, as I mentioned before. Someone else asked, how stable are the vulnerability estimates year to year at the tract level, given the relatively high MOEs? This is a good question. At the tract level, it's going to depend. The stability of the estimate itself will depend on the size of the tract. So the larger tracts actually tend to be very stable, but the smaller ones are the ones that can shift a bit. So again, if you're not sure whether the change is significant or not, you do want to look at those margins of error, because let's say an estimate is 40%, but the margin of error is plus or minus 10%. If the next year it's 45% or 35%, it's still within that margin of error. if you're comparing it. So always look at the margins of error when you're comparing from year to year. But the stability is ultimately tied to the size of the geography. Again, we try to reduce the margins of error to the best of our ability using modeling techniques. So we know the estimates tend to be fairly reliable, but on a specific track by track basis, it's going to vary depending on the size of the tract. Okay, so another question, do you have any plans to create more hazard-specific CRE? For example, I could imagine how incorporating housing age might be helpful in an earthquake-specific tool. This is a good question. We do get this question from time to time. We are definitely open to creating another CRE-specific estimate that's for specific hazards. The tricky thing is that there's just a lot of options to choose from. We thought that heat exposure was appropriate from an environmental standpoint. Hurricanes has also been brought up, but yeah, I think that's definitely something that our more experimental branch that works with us, we refer to them as the front office, but they actually help with newer CRE products and data innovation and improvements to our CRE products. It's been something that they've been working with FEMA to figure out if there are other CRE products that might be more useful for specific hazards. In the meantime, we do have ranking tables by specific hazards. It's not quite a CRE estimate geared towards the hazard, but what you can do is using National Risk Index data on hazard damage, you can see whether, which areas have the highest social vulnerability that also have at least some risk to a given hazard. So we have earthquake tables where areas that have at least moderate risk of earthquake damage, you look at the most vulnerable counties and tracts there. We have one for hurricanes as well, and wildfires. So it's not quite having a modeled estimate specifically towards those hazards, but it does let you at least subset to areas that tend to have specific hazards and seeing what are the most vulnerable counties, what are the most vulnerable tracts. So if you go to the CRE homepage and you click data sets, you can find also ranking tables that look at CRE estimates by specific hazard. Okay, so I'm going to read another question. What would you suggest for factoring the number, not just the share of people who are at risk? So we do have, besides just, that share of the percentage, we do get a total. So you can also, if you're not interested in just the percent of the population, but you just want to look at which areas have the highest number of people at risk, we do have population totals by each social vulnerability category. How you want to use that is ultimately up to you. I know some people, for example, have a hard time with the fact that we have county data and census tract data, but maybe they want county subdivision data. Technically, you can create your own CRE estimate by, as long as the tracts kind of fit into those county subdivisions, you can actually use the totals in each group to kind of create a county subdivision estimate. The downside to that, though, is it's not easy to create a margin of error if you're going to do it that way. But there are some benefits to not necessarily using the share for each geography, but looking at the totals as well, depending on what your research question is. And hopefully that answers your question.
I wanted to follow up on Benjamin's point. Actually, it brought to mind your question, Diana. Some work not using community resilience estimates, but with the SVI. There is a researcher in Florida, I think her name is Georgiana Strode, who has done work on, scaling or visualizing the CDC's SVI scaled by population size. So loading SVI into a GIS and using population as a weight when visualizing risk, so that unpopulated areas that are high risk have kind of a high color intensity but a small size, and then very populous areas are giving kind of much larger area that's colored in, and then it's colored in according to risk. So it's kind of a neat way. I'm going to see if I can find that URL, and I'll share it in the chat. I wanted to ask a question about making sure that I heard right. So the community resilience estimates for heat and for equity are based on publicly available ACS variables, combinations of those. But the baseline, the original CRE, is using kind of some two-way table tabulations. Like I think you use an example, like maybe age by poverty status or disability. That's maybe not in the ACS, not available in the ACS, and that's the reason why you can't publish the specific SV factors for a particular area because those haven't gone through disclosure review. And if that's right, I mean, is that maybe on the roadmap to get permission to share those?
Yeah, that's another reason why we don't always publish it by specific SV groups, right? Yeah, there's a disclosure risk potentially, especially when you do that at lower levels of geography. I don't think there's any goals to try to make something publicly available. There are, I mean, that's part of the reason why we did the CRE for equity was so that people could get an idea, at least through general characteristics, why an area might be flagged without necessarily publishing, the specific, percentage of people in a specific, that have a specific social vulnerability. There's no plans in the future to publish that from a disclosure perspective, especially at lower levels of geography. And it's also, there's a lot of potential cuts when you think about it too, not just the 10 components, but if you want to cross, which areas have high poverty and older age group, it ends up just creating a lot of variables and a lot of different combinations. So I think for now, we haven't decided to publish that. But that's kind of a little bit more of the explanation for that. It comes up a bit where people want to know a little bit more about that information. But yeah, there is some disclosure concerns there, as well as just the fact that there are a lot of different combinations of social vulnerabilities all at once that would be trickier to figure out how to output. Any other questions?
Now is your chance. Speak up or throw your question in the chat.
So I was able to find that paper and dropped it in there for folks who are interested. I think it's an open access paper. So as for folks who are interested in like absolute population size, that's absolutely a part, I think, of disaster response. That places that are very high risk, but where there's very few people, decisions may be made not to prioritize those areas over those where you could have a bigger impact because of a maybe more dense population, even if it is, strictly speaking, less relative risk. I think that's a great point.
I'll put this in the chat. If you have any specific questions that come to mind after the presentation, just email us at seaside.cre@census.gov. Seaside's our division, if you're wondering what that acronym is. And yes, we pronounce it Seaside, SEHSD. It's, I don't know, it's a little cheesy, but that's what we call our division. So yeah, if you have any questions, any follow-up questions, or want to know where to find more data, just shoot us an email.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting and different from what we've seen. It's a different product, so we really appreciate you coming and sharing about it.
No problem. All right. Well, thank you everyone for having me.
Well, thank you. So we finished up a little early, and our next speaker is an Intel 12:30. So I guess we'll break for a break and lunch, and then reconvene at 12:30.
Yeah, thank you all. See you all soon.
See you this afternoon. Welcome back to those who are arriving back from lunch, for those of you on the West Coast, and welcome back to an early afternoon webinar, or late afternoon webinar, I guess, for those on the East Coast. Okay, it's 12:30, so let's go ahead and get started. Ethan, are you back?
Realize we need to have some background music here so that you know you're in the right place and that we're about to get started. But I'm very excited about the next 2 sessions because we will be offering something that is maybe seems like a little early to start talking about the 2030 census, but it's really not. When we got the Federal Register notice about the Redistricting Data Program and the Block Boundary Suggestion Project starting next year, we realized, okay, this is it. We need to start thinking about 2030 census, about being prepared. And so we have 2 speakers today. One who will be talking specifically about Redistricting Data Program, the Block Boundary Suggestion Project, and then another speaker who will be talking about the LUCA program, Local Updated Census Addresses, because everything we can do now to start making sure we have the best housing and address frame data available means that we can, hopefully have that all the best quality 2030 census.
So our next speakers are going to present on the road to 2030 census for state and local partnerships. And our presenters are Colleen Joyce, who's the Assistant Chief of Redistricting and Voting Rights Data. And then Linda Akers-Smith, who's the Government Engagement Branch with the Government Engagement Branch and the Geography Division. So with that, I don't know who's starting first. Is it Colleen or Linda?
This is Linda. I'll go ahead and start first if that's okay and load my presentation, but I just want to give out a special thank you, Erica and Ethan, for inviting us to participate to talk about the 2030 geographic programs. So with that, let me go ahead and load my presentation. Great, thanks.
Go ahead,
I'm
Linda.
trusting that came through. There we go. I'm sorry, my had something disconnected, so I wasn't getting any sound. Sorry that if I was speaking over someone else.
Not at all. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this is Linda Akers-Smith. I hope you can hear well. I hope you can see my presentation. So I'm going to start off with the 2030 Geographic Partnership Programs, and then Colleen will follow me with the Block Boundary Suggestion Project and Redistricting Programs. So this is what our agenda will look like. Here we go. All right. So in the next half hour, I'm going to cover the following topics. I'm going to talk about the partnership program data lifecycle, followed by a quick overview of our geographic partnership programs, and then I'll focus in on the boundary and annexation survey that's happening this year, and then the local update of census addresses program, and talk a little bit about some innovations that are specific to these programs, and then we'll go over some ideas of what you can do now to prepare for LUCA, and we'll take a quick look at some of the tools that are available for you to do that. So with that, the data lifecycle for all geographic partnership programs consists of partners indicating interest and then registering for a program, and then partners reviewing census products and providing updates to our legal, statistical, or administrative boundaries or addresses. And then those updates are then reviewed, processed, and then ingested to the Census Bureau's geographic database. And then finally, those updated data sets and products are created and distributed back out. On this slide, these are linkable to our program web pages. I'm going to talk about three programs quickly for awareness, and then I'll go into a little more detail on our later slides on some specific programs. But I do want to mention the School District Review Program. The School District Review Program allows state mapping coordinators to review the Census Bureau's school district information and then update federal school district local education codes, school district boundaries, the names, levels, and grade ranges. And then those updates are processed and they're used in forming the Census Bureau's estimates of the number of children aged 5 through 17 in families in poverty in each school district. Then I'd also like to mention our PSAP program, which is our Participant Statistical Areas program. That happens once a decade, and the schedule spans from 2028 to 2030. And this is a program that enables invited participants to review and update selected statistical boundaries such as census tracts, block groups, census county divisions, tribal census tracts, and tribal block groups following specific guidelines and criteria. And the Census Bureau will use those newly defined statistical areas to tabulate data for the 2030 census, and then, of course, the American Community Survey and the Economic Census data. And the last program I'd like to talk about quickly is the New Construction Program. This is actually a successive program to the Local Update of Census Addresses, or LUCA program, and it collects residential housing units that are built between the end of the LUCA program and Census Day, which is April 1st of 2030. So here's a graphic that shows all of the geographic programs on a timeline. So as you can see, we have our BAS and our school district review program happening on an annual basis. And then in 2027, we start those decennial geographic partnership programs. And that begins with LUCA, which starts in 2027 through 2029. And then our Participant Statistical Areas program that starts in 2028 and ends in 2030. And then in 2029, we start our New Construction program. And then in 2030, we have a boundary validation program, which I'll talk about here in this next slide. So our boundary and annexation survey is an annual opportunity to review the Census Bureau's legal boundary data. And participating in BAS confirms legal boundaries in the Census Bureau's database are current and accurate, and increases the accuracy of statistical data collected and tabulated by our various censuses and surveys. And I want to mention that new for BAS is that state and county governments can create or modify census designated places during the boundary and annexation survey. And this used to only be offered once a decade during the Statistical Areas program, but now it's offered annually. In terms of our timeline, in early January, the annual response email is sent out to the BAS point of contact. And if we don't have a point of contact, we send that invitation out to the highest elected official or tribal chairperson. March 1st is our first BAS deadline, which means that boundary updates that are returned by this date will be reflected in the American Community Survey data and then in next year's BAS materials. And then mid-February through May is where we, with the help of the state data centers, conduct some BAS non-response follow-up. And then May 31st is our final BAS deadline, which is where updates that are returned by this date will be reflected in next year's BAS materials. In addition to the annual BAS program, we also conduct a boundary validation program in calendar year 2030. And this program provides the highest elected officials one final opportunity to ensure that the Census Bureau has the correct legal boundaries for their governments before we do the final tabulation on the decennial census. One of the methods to participate in BAS and our other geographic programs is through the use of our Geographic Update Partnership software. This software provides a user-friendly interface with built-in GIS tools and validations to assist with geospatial data updates, including addresses, features, and legal and statistical and administrative boundaries. We've been using this standalone GUPS application since 2015, and it's currently available to use for the school district programs in BAS. But we wanted to progress a little further into newer technology and make GUPS more user-friendly. So we're working on building a new version of GUPS as a web application, and it'll be available for use for the 2025 BAS cycle. Some of the benefits that you'll see from using GUPS Web for BAS are that you have real-time collaboration, so you can invite your colleagues to as reviewers onto an existing project, and there's no limit to the number of reviewers that you can have working on a project. You're not required to download any software or materials, so all materials are available online via the web. There's additional processing power, so the application can scale up or down based on user load or processing load. And we're making multiple editing methods available for creating updates. So you can choose between doing an automated or manual change creation for your boundary updates. And just to note, when the boundary and annexation survey invitations are sent out in December, if you do have boundary changes to report in 2025, you can now select from 4 different methods of submission. You can select the BAS toolbox for ArcGIS, paper maps, our GUPS standalone, or now GUPS web. We plan on having live webinar trainings in the January-February timeframe with a rollout of the boundary and annexation survey, and we're also planning on creating some training modules that'll be posted onto the BAS websites. The GUPS web will continue to develop and evolve, and we expect to make this option available for future geographic programs as well. So let's turn to the local update of census addresses now. This program allows tribal, state, and local officials the ability to comment on the Census Bureau's address list prior to the 2030 census. This is an opportunity that's provided once a decade, and it supports the Address List Improvement Act of 1994, which was made into public law and is one of the first opportunities for engagement with the 2030 census. Participation in LUCA is not required, but governments may want to because the Census Bureau estimates that trillions of dollars in federal funding have been distributed annually to tribal governments, states, communities, and other recipients using census data in whole or in part. And LUCA is also an opportunity to provide input into the address list for your jurisdiction, which is an important step towards ensuring everyone is counted in the 2030 census. LUCA starts in early July of 2027 with invitations that go out to the highest elected or appointed official from active, functioning legal governments. We also send a variation of the LUCA invitation to a broad list of contacts via email for awareness. And so that CC list will include liaisons from LUCA for 2020, our current boundary and annexation survey contacts. We also CC regional planning agencies, councils of governments, state data centers, and then any high-profile contacts such as city managers. Highest elected officials can designate a person who will represent their jurisdiction, and this can include direct employees, interns, contractors, or they can designate alternate reviewers such as a county, state data center, or regional planning agency. To sign up for LUCA, you'll be directed to our new application. It's called the Geography Division Partner Portal. And the Geography Division Partner Portal will serve as a communications hub for LUCA and other geographic programs. And within this hub, you can respond to our program invitations. You can also update contact information for your jurisdiction, as well as view historical participation information. You can designate LUCA reviewers, complete your LUCA participation forms, and request materials. You can securely upload and update authoritative geographic data as well as download data and products through the portal and correspond directly with Census Bureau program points of contact. Similar to the 2020 LUCA, there are 4 distinct LUCA phases. I'm not sure if this slide is hard to read, so I'm going to go ahead and transition and go to our website, which I think is slightly easier to read if you can give me a minute. Okay, so we deployed this LUCA website at the beginning of October. And what we're going to do here is click over on important dates and take a look at these 4 phases of LUCA. So the first phase occurs from early 2027 to mid 2027, and this is the preparation or prepare to participate in LUCA phase. So this 6-month period is the time to gather materials to support the address review, set up accounts, and get registered. In this phase, you're going to have access to the latest online block counts to gain confidence in our address inventory. If you feel a closer look is necessary, you can sign the LUCA confidentiality form at this time and gain access to our protected address list through a secure network environment. We won't accept submissions at this time, but it is an opportunity for you to start training, become familiar with our processes, tools, and even practice conducting address level reviews with our confidential data protected by Title 13. The next phase goes from late 2027 to early 2028. This is where you review the address list and submit changes. So additional communications will be sent out in the fall of 2027, and it's a continued opportunity to learn about LUCA, set up accounts, and get registered if that hasn't happened yet. The level of effort for this next phase is really based on whether address counts meet your expectations. If the address counts don't meet your expectations or the participants are unsure, then they can request address level information, and that process will include the completion of a confidentiality agreement, an address matching service that'll be available as an option to match your local address list to our census address list, the identification of suggested adds, deletes, or updated geographic coordinates, and a LUCA submission with address level suggestions. Now, if address counts do meet your expectations, LUCA is a much simpler review by just simply letting us know that your coverage looks good. For 2030, we extended this review period from 4 months to 6 months. There will be a firm deadline for LUCA submissions so that the Census Bureau has time to process submissions and ensure all eligible addresses are included in the 2030 census. So before the next phase begins, there's a gap. The Census Bureau needs additional time to process the submissions, and it takes the rest of 2028 to review and ensure those eligible addresses are included in the 2030 census address list. The next phase begins in early 2029. So this is the feedback and appeals phase. Governments that signed our confidentiality agreement will receive address level feedback on how their submissions were incorporated into our Census Bureau's address list. And this phase includes an option to submit an appeal within 45 days of receiving feedback to the Office of Management and Budget. And finally, our closeout period, and this marks the end of a participant's address access to confidential LUCA materials, or what we call closeout. If you can just give me a minute, we'll transition back to the slideshow. And we're going to talk about preparing for LUCA now. So while LUCA doesn't officially start until 2027, governments can choose to start preparing now. If your government does not have an address list, you might consider developing one. Some suggestions would be local address sources like building permits, E911 address files, local utility records, annexation records, or taxation files might be available. We want the address list to include location information, such as latitude and longitude. You might want to think about reaching out to community-based organizations because they might be a resource to identify any missing or hidden housing units. And the Census Bureau does use a variety of sources to maintain the address list. So if you do have an address list, consider publishing your address data to the National Address Database and or sharing your address and parcel data online. Only residential living quarters will be included in the frame for the 2030 census operations, so care should be taken to exclude other address structures such as libraries, fire hydrants, or businesses. And attention should also be given to your group quarters, such as dorms and nursing homes, as these are considered living quarters, but only require the basic street address for the entire facility in your LUCA list. Learn about resources that may be available to support a LUCA review, including if an alternate reviewer is available, such as a county, state data center, or regional planning agency. And the review of the address counts is really an important step to help determine if we're capturing growth in your community. So if the address counts meet your expectations, your effort to participate in LUCA should be low. But if not, consider investing additional resources into participating in LUCA. So let's talk a little bit about the tools that we have available now on our website. The first bullet provides 2 links, and the first one is the current address counts, and the other link is for the 2020 census address counts. And these are downloadable files that provide total housing units and group quarters count by census tabulation block at the state level. Our next tools are viewers, and there are 2 links there. One's for the current address count listing files viewer, and the second is for the 2020 census address count map viewer. The map viewer complements the address count files by showing a graphical map view and block boundaries. The next tool is our Census Bureau's address geocoder, and participants can use the Census Bureau's geocoder to append census tabulation blocks to your address list. We plan for future integration to allow tabulation block levels to easily compare to existing count lists produced by the Census Bureau. If you plan to participate in LUCA, we encourage you to compare your census address counts, the census address counts to your address counts, and use your local knowledge and expertise to determine if we have the right number of addresses and if they're in the correct census block. This might also allow you to prioritize your review and focus your resources on areas where coverage can be improved. And this is our newest tool, the Housing Unit Change Viewer. This viewer puts 2020 address counts and current address counts on the previous slide into one viewer, so you can easily see blocks where counts have increased, decreased, or remain the same since the 2020 census. So I'm going to go ahead and switch out really quick, and I'm going to do a short demo. So here I'm back on the LUCA website, and I'm going to go to Resources to Prepare. All of the tools I mentioned are here on the LUCA website, and the first one we're going to look at is the Housing Unit Change Viewer. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. This Housing Unit Change Viewer might be a really good option if you want to spot check areas or to see if the Census Bureau is capturing growth or change. Or it could be a useful tool for those jurisdictions that don't have complete address lists but know where change is occurring within their jurisdiction. You can look at percent change, numeric change, or both percent and numeric change. In this case, I'm going to do percent change because I think it's just a prettier map. So the default's at the state level, but as you zoom in, it's going to scale down to county and then tract and then census block group, and then eventually the census block, as you can see here. The legend shows the amount of change in a given block. So for example, green indicates where counts have increased. The darker the green, the bigger the increase. Purple indicates where counts have decreased, and white indicates where counts have not changed since the 2020 census. You can also search using a place name or tribal area, or you can use census geography using these tools right here. I'm going to go ahead up and pull up a city. And we're going to zoom into this city and take a look at a block here. I'm going to take a look at this backwards L-shaped block that's in dark green. I'm going to turn on the aerial imagery, and then I'm going to click on the block to see the details. So the details are showing us that the total number of housing units in 2020 was 14, but now it is increased to 25. So there's been a change in 11 housing units. It also shows us the percent change in the number of housing units as well as any group quarters and the changes between 2020 and 2024. And then here at the bottom is the GeoID. It's basically just a combination of this geography here. It's Washington, Pierce County, and then the census tract and the census block mushed together into this GeoID. And we'll be using that a little bit later. I'm going to change to numeric change. It'll take me back to that block just to take off the yellow highlight to take a look at what's going on here. So if you zoom in over here to the northern part of the block, you can sort of see that there has been some new development. This cul-de-sac has been added. It looks like there's a vacant lot over here, maybe where another housing unit's going to come in. So it's probably been added since 2020, and as you can see that the Census Bureau's captured that change, and it's reflected in our 2020 address list. Let's take a look maybe at an area where there is some decrease in housing units, and it looks like over here, maybe in Fort Lewis. As I scroll in, we have certainly a number of blocks here in purple, and it looks like there's been some decreases in housing units. So in 2020, this block had 7 housing units and now has changed to 3. This one has a 1 unit decrease. This one has a 3 unit decrease. There's quite a number of them. I'm going to turn off the imagery so you can sort of see where the decrease in housing units are, but then it's kind of surrounded by this area where there's either no housing units or no change. So obviously, if you have some knowledge of this area, maybe you understand what's going on, or it's something that you might want to look into a little bit more. So this is a pretty easy to use tool. It shows how our address list is evolving as we add new housing units and maybe correct some of the locations of where things are. So it's a good way to get an idea of sort of how you can track change. Now I'm going to show you something different here. I'm going to show you for governments that might have address lists, you might want to go a different direction. You might want to start by comparing the address list that you have to it. Sorry, you probably want to compare your address counts to our address counts to kind of see where there's gaps in coverage or if we're capturing changes. And so if you wanted to do that, you would probably use some of these different tools. The first thing you'd want to do is append the census block to your address list. So I'm going to go ahead and demo that. This is a sample address list that I'm going to be using. And as you can see, it's just all the same address really. But there's 25 addresses, and I'm going to go ahead and attempt to geocode them and get them a block number so we can compare them against the census address list. So to do that, we're going to open up here the address geocoder. And under geographies, we're going to do this batch address processing. What you would do is I'm going to choose my address list file here, and I'm going to geocode it to our current benchmark, which is our current census address list blocks. You can choose to upload an Excel file, a text file, a CSV file, so it's pretty flexible. Once you do, you're limited to only 10,000 records for each geocoding run, unfortunately. So obviously ours was a very small address list that we're going to geocode. And then you click Get Results. The result of your geocoding is going to look like this. So here's our original address list. Oh, and I forgot to mention what the geocoding tool requires is some sort of unique identifier, a full address list, a full address, city, state, and zip code. So this is our original address list, and what's in green is the result of the geocoder. So it lets us know if we were able to match that address, what type of match, whether it was exact or equivocated. This is just a reflection of the same address we provided. The latitude and longitude, these are coordinates that are derived from address ranges along the street segments. They're not the actual location of the housing unit. Here is the side of the street that address range geocoded to. And then we also provide the state, county, tract, and block. And this is sort of the important piece. This is what we need to use to create a GeoID in order to match it to the census address counts list. So in order to do that, you're going to concatenate these fields. And as you can see here, I just concatenated these to create our GeoID that we need. The next thing you're going to do is create a pivot table. And what you're going to do on your pivot table oops, I just got rid of it. Give me 1 second here. Well, I think it's gone. So what I did in the pivot table is basically I just gave I moved every GeoID into the row section, and then I counted the number of instances or housing units per that GeoID to come up with the total number of housing units in my address list by block. Now that we have a count of addresses by block, we need to go in and add the Census Bureau's current block count. So we're going to go into the current address files listing web page, which is located here. And if we take a look at the record layout, here's the block GeoID that we need to join to our list. So we're going to download the Maryland file. And it's actually a pipe delimited file. This is kind of what it looks like, but as you can see, there's a header. And here's the GeoID that we need. And then next to it is the number of housing units. And that final 0 is the number of group quarters. What you would do is go ahead and you would add it as a tab into your spreadsheet. And then you would do a VLOOKUP or a match to be able to do a side-by-side comparison against your count and the census count. So this is what it would look like if I pulled in that Maryland block count file and summarized it. So in this case, I'm showing in my address list, I have a count of 1 housing unit, but in the census address list, they have a count of 0 housing units. And then in block 2005, my count is 14 housing units, but Census has a different number, 16. And then you can use this to start understanding what's happening between your list and the Census Bureau's list. The last thing you can do is, if you want to take a look at these blocks, you can go ahead and try to visualize them by going into the current map viewer. You can take a look by here using this tool to search by GeoID, and it'll zoom into that block that we're currently looking at. And the block that you're seeing right now is Census Bureau headquarters. So apparently there's probably no housing units in this block. It's just commercial buildings. Okay. Looks like I am out of time. I don't have time to demo this, but I just want to mention that if you are a jurisdiction that has a GIS and you have an address list and it has location information, you probably don't want to take this path. You might want to take a different path and instead use our Tiger Block shape files to do your geocoding, and then use tools within your GIS to summarize your block counts, and import the block count list into your GIS, and then use a join to join those two GeoID fields to do a lot of the work. And with that, I think yes, I think that's it for me. Thank you. And I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's nice to see you again. I think we met when I was in California before. And I wanted to say it's been such a great thing that Geo has published the address count. I threw a question / comment in there about the fact that, 2020 LUCA assessment, if I'm recalling right, had found that there were less than ideal. Like there were a lot of duplicate addresses and rejected addresses, more than wanted to be added. And I really appreciate that your presentation gave a very concrete way. That's something we can do in 2030 that we couldn't do in 2020 as well, which is compare the number of addresses per block in a local database to those in the MAF, in order to kind of identify some blocks for focused further research for submission to LUCA. But I did wonder if you had any other kind of tips that people might start thinking about implementing, assuming that they have a local address database. Do you recommend use of address standard, or anything other than like attachment of census blocks and counts by census blocks? Any of the things people can start thinking about adding to their address database to make it more useful for LUCA?
Other than, making sure that you have some sort of latitude and longitude, that's something that's new for LUCA, would be a suggestion. I could definitely send you a link of address standards that we use, but it's probably more information than you actually need to do LUCA. One of the things that we're going to have available, but it won't be available until that preparation phase, is we're going to have an address matching tool, and that's a bit of a game changer. We didn't have that in 2020, and I think that because of that, we had a lot of addresses that were submitted that were very similar to what we had in the census address list, and they got rejected. It was mostly because we already had it. So when we get to that LUCA preparation phase, you're actually going to have that same tool that we use to match to the USPS's postal file and such, to be able to pull out what truly matches, what truly doesn't match, that you can focus your work on.
That's wonderful. And so we had another question in chat about if the housing unit change viewer is going to be updated every year. And my understanding is it will be. Is that right?
It will be updated twice a year. So, yay.
Yeah. See, Jessica has a hand raised.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jessica Godwin. I'm a research scientist from the University of Washington, and I've been working with the city of Seattle, kind of looking at doing basically all of these things. And so far, we've discovered a few things that might fall. It seems like maybe we have, as the example you showed, a property in one block, but the census has it in another block. Another seemingly common theme is something we consider a group quarters. The census is not counting as a group quarter, or vice versa. And so I'm wondering if you could just comment a little bit on once a city or jurisdiction, state, county finds these things. I know by participating in LUCA, they'd be submitting in the addresses, but what would be the resolution here? Does something belong in the block that the census has always said it's in? Or would it be reassigned to the block that the jurisdiction or state submits? And how are group quarters adjudicated in that way as well?
So in terms of the misgeocoded units, that's something that we deal with in Luca. And that's really the best process to do that. If you find that something's in the wrong block, you'll go ahead and change its latitude, longitude geocode and put it in the right place. And that's something that we want to fix. And that's something that we should be accepting. Obviously, there's something that's incorrect in our database, and you can even go in as part of Luca, correct maybe where a street is or where our address range is. And sometimes we geocode our addresses to the street segments, and that's why it's maybe falling in the wrong place because we have the street in the wrong place. So that's a perfect thing that can be handled during Luca. Group quarters can also be handled during Luca. I know it can be a little difficult to determine what's a group quarter when we both have different definitions of what a group quarter is. We are trying to get a little bit more into alignment of group quarters. We are actually changing some of our definitions and enhancing some of the definitions, but that hasn't been completed yet. We plan on giving you those definitions, but I don't know if it'll be anytime soon. I think we're looking at a time frame of 2026 to provide you with a layout of what the address list should look like and a layout of what the group quarters definitions and layout will be looking like. And we'll potentially look into trying to get that out sooner, but I'm not sure why we're tied to the 2026 other than we're still, making some decisions on that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know we have to move on to the next one, but I did want to follow up on that question on group quarters. So one Tiger database that I think hasn't been well appreciated, or at least I haven't, I've only recently started to look through it and think about it, is the point landmark feature. That includes some metadata about the landmark points, and I feel that some of the landmarks in there are potentially group quarters. So I'm wondering, is that something that Geography has engaged with, the use of the point landmark feature class in Tiger, and is that a way we can maybe review and see like maybe what group quarters are already known and look at that as a template for managing a group quarters database of our own?
That is a good question. I don't think it's something that I could answer, but I think that we could maybe talk a little bit more about it offline to see what we can do. We really don't consider point landmarks too much in the Luca program. And although I think they can be updated in a few of our geographic programs, I'm not really too familiar with what's done with that. So I think we could maybe we can have an offline conversation and talk about maybe what your needs are and how we can meet those needs for you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Sorry.
There you go.
I guess that's my cue. Hello, everyone. I'll just, while I get my screen shared here, my name is Colleen Joyce. I'm the Assistant Chief of the Redistricting Data Office in Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office. Sorry, I can't do my screen and talk at the same time, apparently. Let me just get this start from beginning. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so my name's Colleen Joyce. I'm the Assistant Chief of the Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office at the Census Bureau, and we manage the Redistricting Data Program. So I'm going to go through that with you today, what our plans are for the 2030 program, and also in the same vein as Linda's, how you can start to prepare. But I want to start with a little background on the program, why we have the Redistricting Data Program here at Census Bureau. And it really ties back to, and you'll hear this a lot, the Public Law 94-171. This law was passed in the 1970s, and the goal of it was coming on the heels of the 1960s, the Voting Rights Act, as well as some key Supreme Court cases about put different requirements on the states for their redistricting, and the states felt that they didn't have the data they needed to meet those requirements. So they banded together and lobbied, and the result was passage of Public Law 94-171. And what that outlines is the population count data that they needed race and ethnicity data, and they needed it at small levels of geography. Isn't this advancing? There we go. So in this presentation, this text that you'll see in green is actual language from the law. I won't read it, but I'm trying to draw a connection between the law itself and why we do take some of the steps we do in the program. So the first thing the law requires is that the Census Bureau, and you'll see the term secretary, but that's Secretary of Commerce who delegates that to the director of the Census Bureau. But we're required to furnish a plan for how we're going to meet our requirements under the law to the officers or public bodies who have initial responsibility for redistricting. And we're required to do that not later than April 1 of the 4th year preceding the census date. So as Ethan mentioned, we are way ahead of schedule on that. We did publish the Federal Register notice announcing the 2030 Redistricting Data Program this past July. It is online. I have the link here to it. You can also get to it from our Redistricting Data Program page, which is census.gov/RDO. And I have that at the end of my slide presentation here. Or you can just Google it, honestly, 2030 Census Redistricting Data Program, Federal Register, it comes right up. And it goes through what our plans are, which is what I'm going to also go over today. Another key part of the law requirement is that this program, or the plan that we develop to run the program, has to be developed in a nonpartisan manner. So the way that we try to fulfill that requirement is that we will be going to the majority and minority legislative leadership in each state, and we ask them to jointly all agree on one person to be the official nonpartisan liaison, and that is the person that we work with throughout the Redistricting Data Program. Now, that person can also designate some technical help, so if they have staff that they need to assist them in their work, that's okay too, but that's all done in writing and officially assigned, and this is just how we try to ensure that, that we are meeting that requirement to keep this all nonpartisan. And that letter we'll be sending out in January. We're waiting for the election and all the legislators, to be seated in January, and then we'll be reaching out to them to try to get our liaisons established for 2030. So, what is the plan that we mentioned in the Federal Register notice? If you are familiar with the 2020 Redistricting Data Program, you will see a lot of similarities with 2030. We had really positive feedback from how the plan was structured, the timing, and the way we broke up the work. So we're sticking with that, which means it's going to continue to be a 5-phase program. The first phase being Block Boundary Suggestion Project. Phase 2 is the Voting District Project. Phase 3 is the actual delivery of the 2030 data. Phase 4 is, after that, we will collect the resulting congressional and state legislative district plans from the states once they complete their redistricting work post 2030. And then phase 5 is our lessons learned. We're reviewing the program and looking for those recommendations that will then go to the 2040 census program. And we are actually just wrapping up the phase 5 of 2020 now. So we're just moving, we're kind of we have still have 1 foot in 2020, and we're getting into 2030 as well. So let's go through some of those phases. So why do we have block boundary suggestion? Why do we have voting district project? Well, again, going back to the legislation, one of the things that the officers or public bodies do is they tell us what geographic areas they need these tabulations of data. And what they have told us, and this is part of that phase 5 of 2020, where we're getting that information from them of what they need and whether what they had before is enough or they need something different. But what we're consistently hearing again is the states need block data and they need voting district data to do their redistrictings. That's not to say they don't want, the folks doing this redistricting work don't also want the other standard geographies, like county places, county subdivisions, et cetera. So they'll still get that. But our program is focusing on the 2 tabulation blocks and voting districts. And we cover the blocks in phase 1, voting districts in phase 2.
So in block boundary suggestion project, that will begin in January of 2026. And through that program, states can identify and flag features that they see in our spatial data, the Census Bureau spatial data, and say, I want that to be held as a block boundary for sure in 2030, or I don't want that held as a block boundary. Sometimes we find our states are finding that we have some small kind of, quote unquote, useless blocks or just kind of cluttering. And this is not as used as often as it used to be because I think the Census Bureau's gotten a little better at delineating the blocks. But this might have been used if there was like a small pond or something like that that was a block. Or we used to, I think it's began in Florida, there was like drainage ditches or canals that ran parallel to the major roadways, and both of those would end up being block boundaries. So you had these really long, skinny blocks running along the road that nobody really wanted. So that's why we have this do not hold option, but it's not used nearly as much as the must hold option. Through the program, states can also make updates to linear features like the roads or railroads, area landmarks, and they can suggest updates to legal boundaries. And the reason why is all of these things have potential or would be blocks. So if you know you want the road to be a block, but you see that we don't have it in our database, you can add it through this program. Or we have it, but maybe it's not spatially accurate and you want to correct that. You can do that through our data. And I just want to point out when I'm talking about the legal boundaries, and Linda mentioned the BASS program, that is our official program for keeping and maintaining legal geography. So, but we did find a lot of the redistrict participants, because blocks and voting districts have such a relationship, a strong relationship to the legal geography boundaries. There was a real need to sort of coordinate that a little bit. So the way we work around that is suggested updates to the legal boundaries can be made through BBSP, but then we will actually feed them through the BASS team. So they just do all their usual due diligence on these kinds of submissions to make sure that they are legally accurate, that the legal documentation verifies what we're being told. And they'll also kind of coordinate with the BASS contact for the same area to make sure that everybody's in agreement. And we usually don't have any problem with that because they are legal boundaries that are documented. So it's usually not a problem getting everybody on the same page. But I just wanted to be clear that we're not circumventing BASS by accepting the legal boundaries. So when you do a must flag, what does that really mean? And how is that helping the states with making sure they have the block data they need? And to answer that question, I just wanted to go very quickly and at a very high level on how the census tabulation block creation process works. So if you can imagine looking at a map, if you can imagine that map that Linda just showed, or some of those maps she showed, we have the spatial data. It's including all of our roads, all kinds of roads, primary, secondary, neighborhood, alleys. We have railroads, streams and rivers, canals, power lines, on all the boundaries, all on one display. And anytime all those lines come together to form a polygon, that's a potential block. And so we start with that, and we call that the base block layer. But as you can imagine, you're gonna have a lot of small, tiny slivers, like things that shouldn't be their own block. So we don't want to just go with that. So then the next step is to see how can we merge some of these little polygons together to make a useful tabulation block. And this is all done with an algorithm, all these edges are assigned a priority value ranging from 0 to 99. 99 means that is a definite block boundary. It would never get merged across. But the lower values, and when other criteria are put into play, might be. So they might be removed as a block boundary. And the two blocks it bound, or the two base blocks it bound, will be combined for a final tabulation block. So that's a really quick explanation of how this works. But the reason I mention it is, and this next slide kind of talks about, in general, how the priorities are set. So a boundary, like a place boundary, for example, or county boundary, blocks have to nest within incorporated places or all of our geographic areas. So those are priority 99, definitely going to be held as a block boundary. Primary roads have a high priority, higher than a neighborhood road. A named neighborhood road is going to be lower than a primary, but higher than an unnamed neighborhood road, and so forth down to that. So When you set a must hold flag on anything, that automatically gives it that priority 99. So it will be held as a block boundary. About the only time it wouldn't be is if it doesn't form a closed polygon, because obviously we can't have a block that's not completely closed off. But other than that, a must hold BBSP flag is the highest priority, right up there with the boundary for a place or county subdivision. So even if you have something like a power line that would have normally a very low priority value, the second one of our participants puts a must hold flag on it, it becomes priority 99. So that just explains a little bit about what goes on with these must holds when they're placed on a linear feature. So that's our block. That's how our participants affect the block boundaries. Phase 2 is voting district project. This is through states. They can delineate their voting districts. They just submit to us. And I should have mentioned for both of these phases, we provide to the states our partnership shapefile, which is all of our geographic spatial data. And we also provide the GUPS that Linda mentioned, the Geographic Update Partnership Software. And just like she said, we had the standalone version last decade, and this decade we'll still have that, but we are also going to have a web version of GUPS. And our program also offers states the opportunity to use their own GIS, but they still have to use our partnership shapefiles, our data. With the GUPS or their own GIS software, our participants can submit their boundaries for the voting districts, and they can also continue to make updates to their state legislative and congressional district boundaries, linear features, area landmarks, and continue suggesting updates to legal boundaries as well. And they can also keep making block boundary suggestions, even though this isn't officially BBSP anymore. And that's because the geography is changing so much all the time that, they might need to make updates to the suggestions that they had made prior. The schedule for phase 1 and phase 2, let me go back a second. I forgot to mention that. BBSP starts in January. And this is very similar to the BAS schedule that Linda talked about. We're kind of coordinating all these geographic updates so we can be more efficient. But our participants would give all their updates by May of 26. We get it processed into MathTiger, the geographic database. We were able to create new partnership shapefiles by the end of the year and send them out the following January. So in January of 2027 is our verification for BBSP. At this point, the participants can look at those files. They should see all the updates they made in initial delineation and can add more to it if needed. Again, we get that all incorporated into the database through the summer and early fall of 2027, create new partnership shapefiles in time for the voting district project to begin in January of 28. And that cycle continues at January to May. Voting district project also has a verification cycle, January to May of 2029. And we, for the first time in 2020, had another verification cycle, a final verification cycle that ran from January to March. And we're going to do that again in 2030. It's a little shorter because we have to lock down the database by March to start preparing the geography for the 2030 census data releases. But there is that last little window of time that people can make last minute updates that they might need to make to have the geography they need. Our next phase 3, is the actual tabulations of the population that we have to put out. The law requires that we transmit that to each state within 1 year of Census Day, which is April 1, 2031. And this chart you see at the bottom, which is the same chart you see on this slide, this is our 2020, the tables that were part of the redistricting data summary file. So as you can see, we had race data, we have the ethnicity data, the Hispanic or Latino, not Hispanic or Latino. And we have that data available for total population as well as the voting age population, so 18 years and over. We also had a housing unit table that gave a count of occupied and vacant housing units and a group quarters population by group quarters type. And all of this was available down to the block level, obviously for blocks and voting districts, but for all the other typical standard geography that people are used to seeing. Now I'm showing you 2020, and I was trying to focus on what our plans are for 2030. And that's going to change most likely what those tables look like. As most of you know, Office of Management and Budget issued revision to Directive number 15 on how to collect, maintain, and report race and ethnicity data. And the Census Bureau right now is looking through that, figuring out our plan for implementing that. But so those tables are probably going to look different in 2030, but that's remains to be seen how different or what they will look like. But they will still include total pop. They'll still include the race and ethnicity data because that's a must-have. And we'll still plan to do a housing unit and group quarter table. And I have a note here too. There is a plan for dress rehearsal in 2028, and we will be doing a dress rehearsal prototype redistricting data summary file product based on the data collected in the dress rehearsal. So there'll be a lot of information coming out before 2029, but the key is there will be like people will be able to see exactly what the 2030 redistricting data file will look like, because it should look exactly like what we put out, the prototype product we put out after the dress rehearsal. But people probably know before then as well anyway. Let's see, phase 4 then. So once the states have their data by April 1st of 2031, that's when we get to take a little breather and they go to work drawing the new congressional and state legislative districts. Again, I put the 2020 cycle on here because it's a little more tangible. But typically in the second year after the census, January to July of 2022, after 2020, we collect the new congressional and state legislative district plans. I'm going to skip some of the detail here in the interest of time. But we take all that in, and then we actually create a summary file product where we take the new congressional and state legislative districts delineated post-2020, and we retabulated some tables of 2020 in the new boundaries. So it's the 2020 enumerated data, but in the updated congressional and state legislative district boundaries. And that product was first released in August of 2023. It was for the 118th and the 2022, 118th congressional districts and 2022 state legislative districts. And we do this every 2 years throughout the decade, as long as states are continuing to update their congressional and state legislative districts. So we did it again earlier this year, and we will be releasing a 119th congressional district summary file this December. That will be that 2020 data again, but retabulated for the newer congressional and state legislative districts. The title of the product just says congressional district, but it does include this updated state legislative districts as well. So again, we'll do that every 2 years unless we come across a situation where no state has changes, which we're pretty sure we have 120th coming, and we'll see after that. But states continue to have to update this for one reason or another. And then these next slides I won't go over, but I know the slide deck is going to be made available. So they're just kind of references, and it kind of just gives us the timing of when we're collecting these boundaries. This one gives you the timing for when that new congressional district summary files are released. And you can see we're planning every 2 years. And then this slide tells you where you'll see these updated congressional and state legislative districts reflected in the ACS data. So those are just for your reference. And finally, our phase 5 is kind of our lessons learned. As I mentioned, this is where we get the feedback from states and we can develop our recommendations for the following census. So what you see on your screen here, this is the report that actually came out around this time last decade. That was our lessons learned from 2010 and how it was and the recommendations that we're going to feed into 2020. If this presentation was 2 months later, I'd have the new version. So in December, it's already at the printer. We're going to have the version of this that's the post-2020 lessons learned and recommendations for 2030. But a lot of it I'm already sneak peek I'm telling you about today. But and we'll do the same thing in 2034. We'll be getting ready to release this version of the post-2030 and recommendations for 2040. We've been putting this report out for over once a decade for 40 some years now. Again, this slide's again just for reference. It's we talked about all of these things already, but this is our timeline for when the phases are going to occur and some of our key milestones. And you can see all the phases there, including how that phase 4 collection of districts with each new congressional session is occurring every 2 years. So I won't go any more into this, but that again is just for your reference. So with the last few minutes I have, I just want to go over a couple of things about how people can be preparing for BBSP and voting district projects, which is beginning in a little over a year from now. The key thing is really about preparing your geography. The blocks that folks need for redistricting are so tied up with the underlying geography of the incorporated places, the county subdivisions. So participating in BAS is huge. The cleaner all that geography is, it's a lot less work for the states to do in BBSP because a lot of those block boundaries are already going to be set. So it's key to look at the data, and if you can get into participating in programs like BAS, that's going to help a lot. The other thing that we hear a lot of is a lot of issues people are having, they have every decade. And it's hard because we only do this once every 10 years. So when the states are in the thick of trying to do their redistricting and they run into a troublesome block or something that's not working for them, there's nothing they can do once the block data are out, really. So they, being, you know, smart, capable people who just have to get the job done, they figure out a way to do it. And then, like a lot of us, it's such a rush and you're stressed and you're doing this, and then you kind of forget about the problems you had, and then they just show up again 10 years later. So we're always trying to tell our liaisons, like, really try to make note when you run into these issues and fixes and see, because they could probably be fixed in 2030 BBSP. And another people we hear a lot from are more local officials, like local election officials that really have to deal with a lot of these troublesome situations. So we encourage people to be looking at local officials, particularly local election administrators, who can kind of point out where they were having trouble in 2020, so that we can look at that in BBSP and get it fixed where we can for 2030. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is another helpful tool, and some of those tools that Linda showed about looking at your housing unit count lists and things like that can be really helpful for trying to figure out what blocks are going to be easy to work with or difficult to work with when you're doing redistricting. But another product we did last time, and it was really helpful, is with each cycle of BBSP and BTDB. So every January from 2026 through 2029, we actually run that block creation algorithm that I was talking about before and create blocks that we call them prototype blocks. They're not used for anything real. They're just a guide. And what it's telling you is, if we created census tabulation blocks today, like in 2027, 2028, whenever, this is what they look like. This is what you would have to work with. And we do that to try to help people can look at them and see, can I work with this? Or, oh, this area is going to be really hard. And it helps target their BBSP work, whether they want to add an invisible line and flag that a must hold to split a large block, or whatever they might want to do. So this is a really useful tool, and it is put on the public website so anyone can look at it. And it's, again, we don't tabulate anything to it. It's just a reference file, but it really gives people a picture of what things are going to look like if you didn't participate in BBSP. And maybe you look at it and everything looks great and you don't have to do much in BBSP. That's fine too. But at least you have like a little bit of a peek in to see what these things are going to look like. That file also includes like a block size indicator. So it will tell you, and that is add housing unit counts. So you can see if a block has a ton of housing unit counts and you think that might be a problem when you're redistricting because you're trying to get that equal population for each district. And it also includes a shape index. So because of a lot of requirements that some states have for redistricting is that districts are compact. And so if you have some kind of weird shaped block that's going to create a weird tail on your state legislative district or whatever it is, these shape index can tell you a little bit information about what that looks like, and maybe direct you to take a look at that to see if it's going to be an issue for you or not. So this is another tool, and we don't put it out pre-BBSP, so you can't really look at it to prepare for BBSP, but it's a useful tool to use during the program itself. So that is everything I had. So I still have 5 minutes, I guess, we have for questions for me, or if you have any more questions for Linda.
Yeah, I see a hand raised from Ariel.
Thank you
I'm
for
just
your
gonna.
presentation. It was very informative. I have
With a very quiet sound, Ariel, for me. I'm not sure if the microphone is.
Is that any better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I had a couple questions related to slide 5. I saw that program submissions are only accepted from official liaisons. And I was wondering if that meant that like county or city or kind of regional governments cannot make changes to blocks unless it filters up through the liaison that's designated by the legislative leadership that the program reaches out to.
Yeah, that's true. So in order to keep that nonpartisan liaison or nonpartisan manner of conducting the program, we can only accept BBSP and VTD updates from the official liaison. So we haven't in the past, but we do plan to, once we know who those people are, we will have that made publicly available so we can refer people to them. But that's really for the blocks, that's just for the flagging, to put a must hold, do not hold. There's, as you know, Linda talked about other programs where people can get involved and influence, for example, where roads are, or the BASS program. Of course, the BASS has their official contacts too, but yeah, in short, yeah, we can only accept these updates from our official nonpartisan liaison.
And just a follow-up question on that. So I know Linda mentioned the participant statistical area program, and that is all dealing with kind of higher level, I guess, for lack of a better term, geographies. So it's all geographies that are based on what blocks exist and are created through BBSP. Is that correct?
It's actually a little bit the other way around. So once those entities are defined through, and Linda, jump in if I say anything wrong, but for example, in the PSAP and Participant Statistical Areas program, if they delineate like say a tribal tract, that tribal tract will automatically be a block. The boundary of the tract will be a block boundary as well. So the blocks, it's a little bit for like top down, where they take all those boundaries, as I mentioned in that base boundary layer, they'll take all those and make blocks, and then maybe merge across. But yeah, those will automatically, we create the blocks last. In other words, I'm sorry, I'm not explaining that very well. So we use all the existing geography, including the participant statistical area geography, and then create the blocks after that. Does that make sense? I didn't explain that very well, I don't think, but.
Well, what I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that like you're saying that actually, yes, PSAP and other programs do affect blocks. You're just not directly editing blocks through those programs.
Yes.
I think the reason why I was maybe making a confused face, I've been told I have an animated face that gives away my thoughts, but I was just curious because if I'm remembering the slide from Linda's presentation correctly, PSAP occurs in 2028 and 2029, and BBSP occurs in 2026 and 2027. So what you're saying about like PSAP influencing BBSP from a time perspective is a little confusing to me.
So you can think of it as the blocks aren't created till 2030. But BBSP, like flagging a road and saying, I want this to be a block boundary, that's just an input to the block creation process. It's going to happen in 2030. And the another input is the existing boundaries of geographic areas, which would be something that's being created in PSAP. So a block group, for example, that might be, coming out of PSAP is also another input to what the blocks will be created in 2030. So the blocks aren't getting created in BBSP. People are just telling us, I want you to make sure when you do create the blocks that this power line is a block boundary. Does that help? Yeah. They're both inputs into the final creation of the 2030 tabulation blocks.
Thank you. I have maybe 2 more questions, but I don't want to hog the time, so I can maybe follow up later, or if no one else has questions, can keep going.
I don't see any other hands raised. I did want to actually follow up on your last question, Ariel, and then I think we have time for you to ask your other questions too. But I wanted to just get clarification on like the type of changes that are in scope. You know, I understand kind of locking and kind of preserving certain blocks. We've been, you know, part of the motivation for inviting you to speak today with us was jurisdictions who are interested in actually editing, you know, splitting some large blocks that have become more populated since the last census, and they'd like to draw them in such a way that they can maybe incorporate chunks in the future and just have a better sense of the lay of the population for some of these really large sprawling blocks. And so I think that, you know, those might be flagged by the algorithm that will be used later to define new block boundaries. But if jurisdictions want to be involved in making that kind of change, or in some cases, we've also encountered where blocks split tax lots. And that's one of the things that jurisdictions, when we're doing redistricting and other kind of cases, would like to rectify block boundaries to be correctly aligned with where land parcels are. And so I know that's like a really technically challenging thing, but if there are jurisdictions that do want to do that, are those kind of suggestions of changes in scope for BBSP?
They are in scope. Again, you have to go through the official liaison, kind of work with them on it. But that is a perfect example of why you might want to flag a line. And you can add lines through BBSP. So it's not just, oh, this road's here and I want to make sure you make that a block boundary. You can put in invisible lines like parcel boundaries. You can add those and flag those as must holds through this program. Absolutely. We've had people just draw lines that are nothing. They're just invisible lines because they just need to split a block, a large block that was a problem the last time. So it doesn't even have to be anything. Just be going through space.
I don't see any other hands raised, so I think Ariel, you're can go right for it.
Thank you. Another question I was wondering about is certain kind of special geographies, like school districts is maybe a bad example because there's a separate collection process for that, but other like special districts or like Oregon has things like urban growth boundaries. Are those things that would be captured through the PSAP or through the block boundary suggestion project?
Linda can correct me along. Urban growth areas, I believe we do keep through another program. I'm not sure what. Linda would probably know. But there are other things. I know some people have like community development districts or things like that is not a standard census geography, but they could be kind of shoehorned in through BBSP, and that's totally acceptable. So you would just probably have to draw those in and flag them as a must hold. So you wouldn't get like data. There wouldn't be a data table that says, for example, community development district, but you would have blocks that you could then aggregate into that boundary. So it's a little bit of a workaround kind of a thing, but that is totally allowed. It's totally acceptable through this because we see that too. Those might be important. Or we have communities of interest, historical districts or things like that some states are required to consider when they're doing their redistricting. So they need to make sure that, you know, they have the blocks that they can aggregate into those other geographic and to areas that are unique to that local area.
Thank you. And then the last question, I promise, is I'm wondering if you have information about states that kind of participated in the BBSP leading up to 2020 and what kind of resources they needed to participate. I know the answer probably is that it varies widely by state, but just trying to get a better understanding of like what some of the different models look like.
Yeah, it does vary. And a lot of it is just looking at like what they had the last time, what, things that were troublesome from them from before. I think a lot of it's lessons learned. I think they do try to foreshadow a little bit, like what will these districts kind of look like down the road. And I think a lot of it is like just kind of pulling out like blocks that had a ton of housing or a ton of population. And then there's the local knowledge, like maybe they didn't have a ton of population last decade, but we know they've had a lot of growth. That's why some of those tools that Linda showed about looking at address counts over time, because really what you're doing is, I have a colleague who likes to always give a Lego analogy. You've got like, you have those giant Legos or you have the little tiny ones, but you have to build something. And the smaller units you have, the easier, the more flexibility you have to really keep it refined. So a lot of them might just look at blocks that have large housing unit counts and be like, yeah, this could become a problem. We better split this up into some smaller units. And maybe we end up keeping that whole area together anyway, but it gives us the flexibility when we have to do the work. So a lot of it's kind of looking at that kind of thing too. It is a little bit about trying to see into the future for them and what they think they might need, which is always tricky. Oh, and the participation, we have a publication on our website. If you go to that census.gov/RDO called Strengthen Numbers, and that gives a lot of statistics about the states that participated, and they submit by county, so it also gives you the counts of how many counties participated in both BVSP and BTD in 2020. So Strengthen Numbers is the publication.
And for those in Washington, the coordinating entity is the Secretary of State in our state, so they're the ones who are primarily involved. And I just wanted to comment on changes, though. I mean, we're talking about blocks, but I know with the PSAP, one has to think about continuity. So you don't want you want to minimize changes to the extent that you can so that you have continuity across decades, and there are all sorts of dependencies like opportunity zones and everything else that entities that you may not be aware of may be dependent on things remaining the same.
I wanted to ask a quick question too on the Strength in Numbers report. So one of the things we've been talking with some other states about and trying to find out is if there is kind of a target. So say, I mean, there's so many blocks, right, that even in a relatively small state like ours is 100,000, and obviously we don't, we can use some of the strategies you mentioned, like trying to get rid of very small blocks, trying to split very large blocks, trying to make sure that blocks align with special districts. But I'm wondering if maybe in the report that you mentioned or in a different report, there's information on what Census Bureau's costs are for block redrawing, kind of on a per block basis or something like that on a per state basis that we could use in terms of understanding what resources might need to be set aside to do this effectively.
That's a good question. I don't know that we have that information. We do, we're aware that's always an issue. We hear that from our liaisons that they, in fact, another thing we'll be doing next year, and we'll be probably working with our SDC networkers here at Census Bureau, is we usually do state kickoff meetings where if the liaison invites us, we will come to the state capitol and give a presentation on the program. And one of the reasons they ask for to happen is because they want us to go to the legislatures and let them know this is happening because they need the funding to do that work. So we'll be doing that. I don't think we do know exactly how much, in terms of that, that each state is devoting to that. And we have states, and this is all voluntary too. So we've had some states that, don't necessarily participate, or maybe they do BBSP, but not VTD or something like that. So that can happen as well. But yeah, I don't know if we have that information from the states. Sorry.
Yeah, or even from a Census Bureau perspective, because I know that some of the block boundary redrawing that happens, like with the kind of the algorithms that you mentioned, and so if there's any internal costs for the Census Bureau.
Yeah, that work is actually done by our geography division. So I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that too. Maybe we can look and get back to you on that. I'm not certain. I mean, it is somewhat of an automated process, but there is, of course, a lot of research that goes into that. And in fact, there's research going on now about how to, people seem relatively happy with the algorithm. It's not perfect and everyone knows that. So but I think the research they're doing now is more of a tweaking, trying to tweak some of the stuff that isn't working well more than anything that would be close to like an overhaul. But yeah, we can look into that. Maybe get back to you on the cost to Census Bureau. We'll make a note of that.
Thanks for the wonderful presentations today from both of you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Linda and Colleen. One last round for questions. Well, with that, I remind everyone we have the race and ethnicity and transition to SPD 15 on November 12th. And we're also looking to schedule shortly a SOGI presentation. So we'll be sending out links to that as well. Is there anything else you'd like to bring up, Ethan?
Well, for those of you participating on the Oregon side, if you registered for this event, you will get the invitation automatically when we have that final link and information for the events on November 12th. So no action will be needed from you as long as you registered.
Okay, well, we'll finish with 3 minutes to spare. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.